Hi everyone, welcome to Ahibash. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to talk about Giyu Tomioka, the water Hashira from Demon Slayer, but not in the way you might expect. This isn't about his fighting techniques or his battles. This is about something much more painful. Giyu didn't lose his ability to feel emotions. He deliberately killed them. He created a dead calm inside his own heart because surviving while everyone he loved died protecting him was too unbearable to face. Through survivor's guilt, through believing he was a fraud who stole his position from a dead friend, through wearing the literal clothing of two people who sacrificed everything for him, Giyu became a living ghost who thought he had no right to exist. But his story isn't really about a man who forgot how to feel. It's about a man who had to learn that surviving when others couldn't doesn't make you unworthy. It makes you responsible for carrying their dreams forward. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Section 1. The night before the wedding. Before Giyu Tomioka became the water Hashira, before he created the technique called dead calm, before he wore a haori split into two different patterns, he was just a who had already lost everything once. His parents were gone. The details of how they died aren't told in the story, but what matters is that Giyu and his older sister Tsutako were orphans living together in the Taisho era of Japan. They only had each other. And for Tsutako, that was enough reason to give up everything. Tsutako wasn't just Giyu's sister. She raised him. She protected him. She made sure he had food to eat and a place to sleep. In a world where demons hunted humans in the darkness, where children could be eaten alive by monsters that once were people, Tsutako worked to give her younger brother something that seemed impossible, a normal childhood. She succeeded, at least for a while. Giyu grew up not knowing the constant fear that defines so many lives in demon-infested Japan. He had his sister, and his sister had him, and that was their world. Then, Tsutako fell in love. She got engaged. She planned a wedding. For the first time since their parents died, Tsutako was going to have something for herself, not just for Giyu. She was going to wear a wedding dress. She was going to marry someone who loved her. She was going to start a family of her own. The wedding was scheduled, preparations were made, and Tsutako must have felt something close to happiness. The kind of happiness that makes you forget, just for a moment, that you live in a world where monsters are real. The demon came the night before the wedding. Not the wedding day itself, not a week before, not a month after. The night before. Tsutako had one more sleep before her life would change forever. She had her wedding dress ready. She had probably spent the evening imagining the next day, thinking about the ceremony, about the food, about seeing her little brother dressed up and happy for her. And then something broke into their home. Something that had once been human, but wasn't anymore. Something that only wanted to eat and kill. Demon Slayer doesn't show us the details of that attack. We don't see the demon's face. We don't know if it was strong or weak, if it had special powers or was just another mindless monster. What we know is that it came for Giyu and Tsutako, and in that moment, Tsutako had to make a choice. She could run, save herself, maybe survive long enough to have that wedding, to live the life she'd planned. Or she could save her brother. She chose Giyu. She didn't hesitate. She didn't stop to think about her wedding dress hanging in the other room, or the man waiting to marry her, or the life she was throwing away. She grabbed her little brother. She hid him somewhere the demon couldn't immediately find him, and she told him to run. Just run. Don't look back. Don't try to fight. Don't try to help. Just survive. And then Tsutako faced the demon alone. She bought Giyu time with her life. The story doesn't tell us how long she lasted, or if she fought back, or if she was scared. It doesn't tell us if she screamed or if she went quietly. All we know is that the night before her wedding, wearing probably just her sleeping clothes, Tsutako Tomioka died so that her younger brother could live. She died without a ceremony. She died without her dress. She died knowing she'd never walk down that aisle or kiss her husband or have children or grow old. She died knowing that everything she'd planned and dreamed about was ending right there in the darkness, alone. Giyu ran. His sister told him to run, so he ran. He ran through winter. The attack happened during one of the coldest times of year, and Giyu was probably not dressed for the weather. He didn't have time to grab a coat or proper shoes. He just ran because Tsutako told him to, because she died to give him that chance, and stopping would mean her death was for nothing. He ran through snow. He ran through freezing temperatures that could kill him just as easily as the demon could. He ran until his legs gave out, until his body couldn't move anymore, until everything went black. He ran for almost an entire day. Think about that. An entire day of running, a small child pushing through winter conditions, not stopping to rest or eat or get warm, just running because his sister died to give him those extra minutes of life. By the time Giyu collapsed, he was on Mount Sagiri. He didn't know where he was. He didn't plan to end up there. He just ran until his body quit, and when he woke up, everything had changed. A boy with orange hair found him. That boy was Sabito, though Giyu wouldn't know how important that name would become. Sabito brought Giyu to a man named Sakonji Orokodaki, a former demon slayer who trained people to fight the monsters that destroyed families like Giyu's. Orokodaki took Giyu in in. He gave him shelter. He gave him food. He gave him a chance to become strong enough that maybe, just maybe, he'd never have to run away again. But something in Giyu broke on that mountain during his sister's last night alive. Something that would never fully heal, even years later when he became one of the strongest demon slayers in Japan. Tsutako's death taught Giyu a lesson that would poison everything good in his life from that moment forward. The lesson was simple and devastating. People who love Giyu die protecting him. Think about what that does to a child. Think about learning at such a young age that being loved is dangerous, that caring about someone means they might die for you, that you can't protect the people who protect you. Giyu didn't just lose his sister that night. He lost his ability to accept love without guilt. He lost the belief that he deserved to be saved. Every time someone would help him, every time someone would show him kindness, every time someone would risk something for his sake, Giyu would remember Tsutako hiding him and telling him to run while she stayed behind to die. The wedding never happened. The man Tsutako was supposed to marry lost his future wife without ever knowing what happened that night. The wedding dress stayed unworn. The ceremony never took place. All those plans, all those dreams, all that hope for happiness, gone because a demon decided to attack the night before instead of any other night. One day earlier and maybe Tsutako survives. One day later and she's already married, maybe living somewhere else. But it happened exactly when it happened, and Tsutako died in the worst possible way, knowing she was throwing away everything she wanted for someone else. Giyu kept Tsutako's haori. A haori is a traditional Japanese jacket, and Tsutako had one that was solid red. After she died, Giyu took that red haori and eventually cut it in half. He would wear that half for the rest of his life, literally carrying his sister's death on his shoulders every single day. The red half of his split pattern haori that makes him so recognizable as a character isn't a fashion choice. It's a memorial. It's a reminder. It's Giyu telling the world, or maybe telling himself, that he only exists because Tsutako stopped existing. This is where Giyu's story really begins. Not when he joins the Demon Slayer Corps, not when he becomes a Hashira, not when he meets Tanjiro. It begins on the night before a wedding that never happened, with a sister who loved her brother more than her own life, with a choice that saved one person and destroyed another. Giyu survived that night, but survival isn't the same as living. He learned that being alive means someone else died in your place. He learned that love equals sacrifice equals death. He learned that if someone cares about you enough, they'll throw themselves between you and harm, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. These lessons carved themselves into Giyu's heart deeper than any demon's claws could. They became the foundation of everything he would later become: the stoic expression, the emotional distance, the refusal to let people get close, the constant guilt, the belief that he didn't deserve his position or his life or his accomplishments. All of it traces back to this moment, to this night, to Tsutako choosing death so Giyu could choose life. The tragedy is that Tsutako probably died happy in some way. Not happy to die, but happy that her brother would live. She probably thought that her sacrifice was worth it, that Giyu would go on to have a full life, that he'd grow up and be safe, and maybe find his own happiness someday. She saved him because she loved him, and because she believed his life had value. She never knew that her death would make Giyu question the value of that life for years to come. She never knew that saving him would trap him in a different kind of prison, one made of guilt instead of demon claws. When Giyu collapsed on Mount Sagiri, he wasn't just physically exhausted. He was carrying the weight of being the only survivor, of being the reason Tsutako never wore her wedding dress, of being worth more to her than her own dreams. That weight didn't get lighter as he grew older. It got heavier. Every year he lived was another year Tsutako didn't. Every birthday was a reminder that she stopped aging the night before her wedding. Every time he saw a wedding or heard about someone getting married, he probably thought about the ceremony that never happened because of him. This is the foundation of the Water Hashira's character. Not his skill with a sword, not his breathing techniques, not his calm expression or his powerful attacks. The foundation is a little boy running through winter until he couldn't run anymore, carrying the knowledge that his sister's last moments were spent buying him time to escape. Everything Giyu becomes, every choice he makes, every relationship he ruins through distance and silence, every moment he refuses to see himself as worthy, It all comes back to the night before the wedding. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But Tsutako's sacrifice was only the first death Giyu would carry on his shoulders, and the next one would come from someone who saw past his guilt and tried to teach him that surviving wasn't a sin. Right before that person died, saving Giyu's life one more time. Section 2. The Boy with the Scar. When Giyu woke up on Mount Sagiri after collapsing from his run through winter, the first person he saw wasn't Sakonji Urokodaki. It was another boy, probably close to his own age, with bright orange hair and a large scar that ran from the corner of his mouth all the way to his ear. That boy's name was Sabito, and he would become the most important person in Giyu's life after Tsutako, which meant, in Giyu's cursed pattern of existence, that Sabito was marked for death from the moment they became friends. Sabito was an orphan too. The demons had taken his family just like they'd taken Giyu's parents and sister. When Urokodaki found Sabito and brought him to Mount Sagiri to train, Sabito probably felt the same emptiness Giyu felt when he first arrived. That hollow feeling of being the only one left, of surviving when everyone else didn't, of not knowing what you're supposed to do with a life that feels like it shouldn't exist anymore. But somehow Sabito handled it differently than Giyu. Where Giyu turned inward and quiet, Sabito stayed determined. Where Giyu saw his survival as a mistake, Sabito saw his as a responsibility. Urokodaki was the former water Hashira, one of the strongest demon slayers of his generation, before he retired to train the next generation of fighters. He specialized in water breathing, a fighting style that used sword techniques mimicking the movement and flow of water. When he took in both Giyu and Sabito, he saw two boys who had lost everything to demons and needed to become strong enough to make sure no one else lost what they'd lost. So he trained them. Hard. For 2 full years, Giyu and Sabito lived on Mount Sagiri, learning to swing swords until their arms felt like they'd fall off, learning to control their breathing in ways that seemed impossible, learning to move like water and strike like waves. They trained together every single day. When one got tired, the other pushed them to keep going. When one wanted to quit, the other reminded them why they couldn't. They were the same age, they'd both lost their families to demons. They both knew what it felt like to be alone in the world. And then suddenly, they weren't alone anymore. They had each other. Giyu, who had shut down emotionally after watching his sister die, started to open up again. Not completely, but enough. Enough to laugh sometimes. Enough to compete with Sabito over who could master a technique faster. Enough to feel like maybe, just maybe, he could have something like friendship again, without it ending in death. Sabito was different from other people Giyu would meet later in life. He didn't tiptoe around Giyu's pain. He didn't treat Giyu like he was fragile or broken. He didn't let Giyu wallow in guilt. Sabito saw right through the walls Giyu built and refused to let him hide behind them. And nowhere was this more clear than during the incident that would define their entire friendship, the day Sabito slapped Giyu across the face. It happened during training. The exact timing isn't specified in the story, but it was sometime during those 2 years before final selection, during a moment when the weight of everything became too much for Giyu to carry. Maybe it was during particularly hard training. Maybe it was a day when Giyu thought about Tsutako and the wedding that never happened. Maybe it was just the slow buildup of survivor's guilt finally breaking through. Whatever the reason, Giyu gave up. He slumped into what the story calls an attitude of self-pity and resigned himself to death. He essentially decided that he didn't want to keep trying, that maybe dying would be easier than living with the guilt, that he shouldn't be here anyway because Tsutako should have saved herself instead. Sabito got angry, really angry. Angry enough to slap his best friend hard across the face. Angry enough to threaten to end their friendship completely. This wasn't gentle encouragement. This wasn't a pep talk. This was Sabito grabbing Giyu by the shoulders, metaphorically speaking, and forcing him to wake up and see what he was doing. Sabito told Giyu that his life was a gift from his sister, that Tsutako died specifically so Giyu could live, that sitting around wishing he died instead was the worst possible way to honor her sacrifice, that if Giyu threw his life away after Tsutako gave up everything to save it, then her death meant nothing. Imagine being Giyu in that moment. You've spent however long carrying the guilt of your sister's death, believing deep down that you shouldn't be alive, that you don't deserve the life she gave you. And then your only friend tells you that thinking this way is actually dishonoring her. That she didn't save you so you could slowly kill yourself through guilt and self-pity. She saved you because she believed your life had value. She saved you because she wanted you to live, actually live, not just survive. Sabito made Giyu see that choosing death after Tsutako chose life for him was the real betrayal, not the other way around. But here's what makes Sabito different from so many other characters who might deliver that kind of harsh truth. After he slapped Giyu and threatened their friendship and said all these hard things, he didn't walk away. He held out his hand. The story specifically mentions this. Sabito held out his hand to Giyu and smiled at him and affirmed that they were still friends. He gave Giyu the truth and the comfort at the same time. He showed Giyu that real friendship means being honest, even when it hurts, but also means not abandoning someone after being honest. Giyu took that hand. Something in him shifted that day. He didn't stop feeling guilty about Tsutako's death. That guilt would follow him for years. But he stopped actively wishing he died in her place. He started trying again. He picked up his sword and went back to training. He looked at Sabito, who had also lost everything but kept fighting anyway, and decided that maybe he could do the same. For the first time since his sister's death, Giyu had hope. More importantly, he had a friend who understood him, who wouldn't let him give up, who saw past the guilt to the person underneath. They became inseparable after that. For the rest of their training, Giyu and Sabito were like brothers. They knew each other's fighting styles so well they could predict each other's moves. They pushed each other to become better. They competed in the healthy way that makes both people stronger. When Urokodaki decided they were finally ready to take the final selection exam, the test that would determine if they could officially join the Demon Slayer Corps, they were both excited. 2 years of brutal training, 2 years of grief transformed into strength, 2 years of friendship that healed some of what the demons had broken. They were ready to become demon slayers together. Urokodaki gave them each a special mask before they left for final selection. These weren't just any masks, they were warding masks, carved by Urokodaki himself, designed to protect his students from demon. Every student of Urokodaki got one of these fox masks. For Giyu, it was white with light blue eyes. For Sabito, it was his own design. Urokodaki told them these masks would keep them safe. He believed it. He gave them these masks with all the hope a teacher has when sending students into danger, believing that this time, this pair of students, they'd be the ones who made it back. What Urokodaki didn't know was that these masks did the exact opposite of protecting his students. There was a demon on the mountain where final selection took place, a demon that Urokodaki had personally captured and imprisoned there over 40 years ago. This demon hated Urokodaki with a burning rage. It hated him so much that it spent decades waiting for revenge. And the way it got revenge was by killing every single student who showed up wearing Urokodaki's fox masks. The masks weren't protection, they were targets. They told this demon exactly who to hunt. By the time Giyu and Sabito arrived for final selection, this demon had already killed 13 of Urokodaki's students. 13 children who trusted their teacher, who wore the masks he gave them, who thought they were protected when actually they were marked for death. But Giyu and Sabito didn't know any of this yet. They arrived at final selection together, wearing their masks, ready to prove themselves. They looked at the wisteria flowers that created the boundary where demons couldn't escape. They listened to the Ubuyashiki children explain the rules. Survive 7 days on this mountain filled with demons, and you pass. Die, and well, you die. Simple as that. Giyu and Sabito probably looked at each other, nodded, and stepped into the forest, confident that they'd both walk out alive in a week. Sabito had a strong sense of justice. This is directly stated in the story. He wasn't just fighting demons because they killed his family, though that was certainly part of it. He was fighting because he genuinely believed in protecting people, and making sure what happened to him and Giyu didn't happen to anyone else. He was the kind of person who couldn't walk past someone in danger without helping. The kind of person who'd risk his own life for a stranger because that's just what you do when you have the power to save people. And Giyu admired this about Sabito. Here was someone who'd suffered just as much as Giyu had, but responded by becoming kinder instead of harder, by opening his heart instead of closing it, by fighting for others instead of just fighting to survive. Sabito was everything Giyu wished he could be. Sabito was proof that you could lose everything and still be good, still be brave, still believed that life was worth protecting. When Giyu looked at Sabito, he didn't just see his best friend. He saw hope. He saw what healing could look like. He saw a future where maybe the pain of losing Sutako wouldn't hurt quite so much because he'd have someone who understood. Which is why what happened during that final selection would destroy Giyu in ways that Sutako's death couldn't. Sutako died to save him, yes, but Sutako was his sister. She was supposed to protect him. That's what older siblings do. It was tragic, but it made sense in its own horrible way. But Sabito was his equal. Sabito was his friend. Sabito was the person who slapped him for wanting to die and told him his life had value. Sabito was supposed to survive with him, to become a demon slayer alongside him, to prove that two orphans could make it through hell together and come out stronger. Sabito wore the green kimono with a geometric hexagon pattern that would later become the other half of Giyu's split haori. He wore it during their training. He wore it during final selection. He wore it when he saved Giyu's life one more time. That pattern would become as important to Giyu as the solid red from Sutako's haori, another piece of the dead literally worn on his body, another reminder that everyone who loved him seemed destined to die protecting him. The 2 years on Mount Sagiri represented something precious to Giyu, proof that he could have good things without them being destroyed. He trained every day with someone who knew his pain and didn't judge him for it. He had a friend who wouldn't let him give up on himself. He had purpose again. Direction, a reason to wake up every morning beyond just existing. For 2 years, Giyu's life wasn't just about carrying guilt. It was about growing stronger with someone who mattered to him. It was about maybe, possibly, eventually, being okay. And then they entered final selection together. 2 boys who become brothers through shared pain and shared purpose. Both of them believing they'd walk out of that forest in 7 days, ready to start their real lives as demon slayers. Both of them wearing the masks their teacher gave them, masks that were supposed to protect them, but actually marked them for death. Both of them completely unaware that the mountain held a demon specifically waiting for students just like them. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Giyu would enter that forest with a friend and leave it with a ghost that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Section 3. The selection that killed a soul. Final selection wasn't just a test. It was a death sentence with a small chance of survival. The Demon Slayer Corps needed to know who was strong enough to actually fight demons and who would just become demon food. So they created an exam that was brutally simple. Take a mountain, trap demons on it using wisteria flowers that demons can't cross, then send in students who've trained for years and see who lives. Survive 7 days and 7 nights on a mountain full of monsters that want to eat you, and you pass. Die, and well, nobody would be surprised. Most students died. That was just expected. The ones who lived became demon slayers. The ones who didn't became statistics. Giyu and Sabito arrived at Mount Fujikasane together. They stood with the other candidates, maybe 20 or 30 students, all of them teenagers, all of them trained by different teachers across Japan, all of them believing they were ready for this. The Ubayashiki children, twins who ran the exam, stood before them and explained the rules. 7 days. Demons trapped by wisteria. Survive, and you're in. The wisteria flowers glowed purple in the evening light, beautiful and deadly, creating a boundary that kept the demons contained on the mountain, but also kept the students trapped inside with them. Among the candidates was a boy named Murata. He trained in water breathing like Giyu and Sabito, though probably under a different teacher. The story mentions him specifically because he was part of the small group that initially stuck together when the exam began. There's safety in numbers, or at least that's what people tell themselves when facing demons. Murata would survive final selection. He'd become a demon slayer and eventually cross paths with Tanjiro years later. But he'd survive while others didn't, and he'd always know he lived because someone else saved him. When the exam started, Giyu and Sabito probably stayed together at first. 2 years of training side by side. 2 years of knowing each other's fighting styles. 2 years of being brothers in everything but blood. They wouldn't split up immediately. They'd watch each other's backs. They'd fought together in practice 1,000 times. Now they'd do it for real. 7 days didn't seem that long. They'd survived 2 years of Orokodaki's brutal training. They'd survived losing their families. 7 days on a mountain would be hard, but they could do it. Together. The first demon they encountered was female. She had a long tongue, which probably meant she used it as a weapon or to grab prey from a distance. The story specifically mentions her because of what she did to Giyu. She injured him, right at the start. First demon, first fight, and Giyu got hurt. We don't know exactly how badly, whether she cut him or grabbed him or poisoned him, but we know it was bad enough that it mattered. Bad enough that Giyu was fighting wounded from day one. Think about what that means. Final selection is 7 days long. Giyu got injured on the first day, which meant he had to survive 6 more days while hurt. Every movement probably hurt. Every fight would be harder. Every demon would smell the blood and know, here's an easy target. Here's a wounded student who might not make it. And Giyu couldn't leave to get medical help because leaving meant failing the exam. He had to push through the pain and hope his injury didn't get infected or reopen or slow him down enough to get him killed. But Giyu survived that first encounter. The demon with the long tongue didn't kill him, even though she injured him. Maybe Sabito helped drive her off. Maybe Giyu managed to get away on his own. Maybe Murata or another candidate intervened. The story doesn't give us those details. What matters is that Giyu lived through day one, even if he was bleeding, even if he was hurt, even if the pain made everything harder. The days passed. Day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. Giyu fighting through exhaustion and pain, probably watching other candidates die around him. Screams in the night, bodies that didn't get up. Students who'd trained for years, who had families waiting for them, who thought they were ready, gone in seconds. Demons are fast. Demons are strong. Demons don't play fair or give second chances. One mistake and you're dead. One moment of weakness and a demon's teeth are in your throat. The mountain was probably littered with bodies by day 5, candidates who didn't make it, dreams that ended in the dark. Then came day 6. Just one more day to survive. One more night and then dawn on day 7 and the exam would be over. Giyu was so close. Injured, exhausted, probably terrified, but close. He'd almost made it. Almost proven that Urokodaki's training paid off. Almost survived to become a real demon slayer alongside Sabito. Almost. A demon attacked him. We don't know if it was the same one with the long tongue or a different one. We don't know if Giyu was sleeping and got ambushed or if he was walking and got surprised. What we know is that this demon hurt Giyu badly. Not just injured, hurt to the point where Giyu passed out. Maybe the demon hit his head. Maybe Giyu lost too much blood. Maybe the exhaustion from 6 days of constant fighting finally caught up to him and his body just shut down. But Giyu went unconscious on that mountain on day 6, with demons all around, completely defenseless. He should have died right there. An unconscious person can't fight back, can't run, can't do anything except become demon food. The demon that knocked Giyu out could have eaten him in seconds. Should have eaten him. Giyu's story should have ended on day 6 of final selection. Another student who almost made it. Another body on the mountain. Another name Urokodaki would add to his list of students who died. But Sabito found him first. Sabito, who was having a completely different experience of final selection than Giyu was. While Giyu struggled and got injured and barely survived, Sabito was thriving. Not because final selection was easy for him. It wasn't easy for anyone. But because Sabito was just that skilled, that determined, that strong. He was killing demons left and right. Every demon he came across, he cut down. His sword work was flawless. His breathing techniques were perfect. He was everything a demon slayer should be. Fast, powerful, focused, unstoppable. But Sabito wasn't just fighting for himself. Remember his strong sense of justice, his inability to walk past someone in danger? That didn't disappear during final selection. If anything, it got stronger. Every time Sabito killed a demon, he wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting every other candidate on that mountain. Every demon Sabito killed was one less demon that could hunt the weaker students. Every demon Sabito cut down meant someone else might survive. And Sabito didn't stop there. When he found candidates in trouble, he saved them. When he saw someone about to die, he intervened. All across that mountain, for 6 days straight, Sabito was saving lives. Students who should have died lived because Sabito showed up at the right moment. Demons that should have killed people got killed by Sabito instead. He was supposed to be taking an exam, supposed to be focused on his own survival, but Sabito couldn't help himself. He saw people dying, and he couldn't just let it happen. So he saved them. All of them. Every single candidate he came across who was in danger, Sabito rescued, including Giyu. Sabito found his best friend unconscious on the ground with a demon standing over him, probably seconds away from killing him. And Sabito, who'd already been fighting for 6 days straight, who was probably exhausted himself, who could have reasonably decided he couldn't save everyone, didn't hesitate. He killed that demon. He saved Giyu's life. He probably dragged Giyu somewhere safer, somewhere the demons wouldn't immediately find him, and then went back to fighting because there were still other candidates to save, still other demons to kill, still one more day to survive. This was the pattern of Sabito's final selection. Fight demons, kill demons, save students, repeat. For almost 7 full days, Sabito carried the weight of keeping everyone alive. Not just himself, everyone. He was 17 years old and taking responsibility for 20+ lives because nobody else could. Because he was the strongest one there. Because his sense of justice wouldn't let him watch people die when he had the power to save them. But there was one demon Sabito couldn't beat. The Hand Demon. The demon Urokodaki had captured and imprisoned on this mountain over 40 years ago. This wasn't a regular demon. This was a demon that had grown strong over decades. A demon that had been eating Urokodaki students for years. A demon that specifically hunted anyone wearing those fox masks. By the time Sabito arrived, the Hand Demon had already killed 13 of Urokodaki's students. 13 teenagers who trained hard and wore their teacher's mask with pride and died because that mask marked them as targets. The story doesn't give us all the details of how Sabito died. We don't see the actual fight, but we know what happened. Sabito fought the Hand Demon, and the Hand Demon won. Maybe Sabito was too tired from saving everyone else. Maybe the demon was just too strong. Maybe 6 days of non-stop fighting finally caught up to him, and he didn't have enough left to win. Maybe if Sabito had focused on his own survival instead of saving every other candidate, he would have had the strength to beat this demon. But Sabito didn't think that way. He couldn't. His whole being was built around protecting people, and he protected people right up until the moment it killed him. The Hand Demon killed Sabito on that mountain. This demon that hated Urokodaki so much it spent 40 years getting revenge through his students, finally got the strongest one of all. The boy with the peach-colored hair and the scar on his face, and the green kimono with the geometric pattern. Dead. The boy who'd slapped Giyu and told him his life had value. Dead. The boy who'd spent 6 days saving everyone else. Dead. Sabito's body fell somewhere on Mount Fujikasane, and he never got back up. Day 7 arrived. The sun rose. The exam was over. The candidates who survived made their way back to the entrance where the Ubuyashiki children waited to congratulate them. One by one, the survivors emerged from the forest, exhausted, bloody, traumatized, but alive. Giyu was among them, still injured from day 1, barely conscious from nearly dying on day 6, but alive, breathing, heart still beating. And then came the part that would break Giyu worse than any demon could. He realized Sabito wasn't with the survivors. Giyu looked around at the faces of the other candidates, all of them alive, all of them having passed, and Sabito wasn't there. The other students were talking about what happened, about the demons they killed, about how they survived. And slowly, through bits of conversation, through piecing together what happened on that mountain, Giyu understood the truth. Sabito had saved everyone. Every single person who survived that exam did so because Sabito protected them. The demons that should have killed them were killed by Sabito instead. The moments when they should have died were moments when Sabito showed up and rescued them. They survived because Sabito was there. They lived because Sabito fought. They passed because Sabito sacrificed his own safety to protect theirs. And Giyu, lying unconscious on day 6, defenseless and about to die, Sabito saved him too. Giyu only survived to day 7 because Sabito found him and killed the demon that was about to eat him. Every other candidate could at least say they killed some demons during the exam. They could point to moments where they fought for themselves, where their training paid off, where they proved they deserved to pass. But Giyu killed exactly 0 demons during final selection. Not one. Not a single demon fell to his sword during those 7 days. He was injured by the first demon he met. He was knocked unconscious and nearly eaten on day 6. He passed the exam without doing the one thing the exam was designed to test: killing demons. Giyu passed because Sabito died protecting him. Giyu lived because Sabito spent his last moments fighting instead of surviving. Giyu became a demon slayer without earning it, without proving himself, without doing anything except being lucky enough to have a friend who wouldn't let him die, even if it meant dying himself. Every other candidate who passed could take pride in their accomplishment, knowing they survived through skill and determination. Giyu couldn't. He knew he passed by accident, by luck, by having someone sacrifice everything for him. Again. It happened again. First Tsutako, now Sabito. First his sister, now his best friend. Both of them died protecting him. Both of them chose his life over theirs. Both of them gave up everything so Giyu could live. And both times, Giyu was helpless to stop it. He couldn't save Tsutako when the demon came. He couldn't help Sabito on that mountain. He just survived while they didn't, and he hated himself for it. But there's something even worse about Sabito's death than Tsutako's. When Tsutako died, Giyu was a child who couldn't fight demons, couldn't protect his sister, couldn't do anything except run like she told him to. He was helpless, yes, but he was supposed to be helpless. He was a kid. What could he have done? But during final selection, Giyu was supposed to be a fighter. He trained for 2 years. He had a sword. He knew water-breathing techniques. He was supposed to be strong enough to protect himself, maybe even strong enough to fight alongside Sabito. Instead, he got injured immediately, struggled the entire exam, and ended up unconscious while Sabito died saving people. The other candidates walked away from that mountain with confidence. They'd proven themselves. They'd faced death and won. They'd earned their place in the Demon Slayer Corps. They had every right to feel proud. But Giyu walked away with nothing except crushing guilt and the knowledge that he didn't deserve to be there. He didn't deserve the uniform they'd give him. He didn't deserve the sword. He didn't deserve the title of Demon Slayer. Because he wasn't a Demon Slayer. He was a fraud who got lucky. A boy who survived not through skill, but through having friends who died for him. This is what final selection did to Giyu. It didn't just take Sabito away. It didn't just add another death to the collection of people Giyu failed to save. It destroyed the one thing Sabito had worked so hard to give him during their training: the belief that his life had value. Sabito slapped Giyu and told him he wasn't allowed to wish he died instead of Tsutako. Sabito said Giyu's life was a gift, something worth fighting for, something that mattered. And then Sabito died, proving it. Died saving Giyu's life one more time. Died making sure Giyu survived even if he didn't. Giyu couldn't reconcile this. He couldn't make it make sense. If his life had so much value, why did everyone who saw that value die protecting it? If he was worth saving, why couldn't he save anyone else? If he deserved to live, why did he pass an exam without killing a single demon, while the person who should have passed died on that mountain? Nothing added up except for one terrible truth. Giyu Tomioka didn't deserve to be alive, and Sabito died because he was too good to accept that. Something died in Giyu on that mountain besides Sabito. The part of him that Sabito had worked to heal. The part that maybe could have learned to live without guilt. The part that thought friendship could exist without death. All of it died with Sabito's body, somewhere on Mount Fujikasane. What walked off that mountain wearing Giyu's face was something else. Something broken beyond what Tsutako's death had broken. Something that would spend years creating a technique called dead calm, because that's exactly what Giyu's heart became. Dead and calm. Feeling nothing, because feeling anything meant remembering that everyone who loved him died. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. And Giyu would take pieces of Sabito's green kimono with the geometric pattern, the one Sabito wore when he saved all those lives, and he'd sew it to half of Tsutako's red, haori, and he'd wear both deaths on his shoulders forever, a walking memorial to the two people who believed his life was worth dying for. Section 4. The Haori of Ghosts. A haori is a traditional Japanese jacket, the kind worn over a kimono. It's usually a single piece of fabric with one consistent design or color. Most demon slayers wore standard black uniforms, with maybe a haori on top if they were high-ranking. The Hashira, the strongest demon slayers, often wore distinctive haori that made them recognizable. Kyojuro Rengoku wore one with flame patterns. Shinobu Kocho wore one with butterfly designs. These haori reflected something about the person wearing them, their breathing style, their personality, their story. Giyu Tomioka's haori didn't match anything else any demon slayer wore. Instead of one pattern, one color, one consistent design, Giyu's haori was split directly down the middle into two completely different halves. The right side was solid red, deep red, the color of blood or sunsets or warning signs. No pattern, no decoration, just pure red fabric. The left side was geometric, squares and rectangles in green, orange, and yellow, creating a pattern that looked almost like a puzzle or a woven design. Two halves that didn't match, sewn together down the center, worn by someone who looked like he was literally split in two. People who saw Giyu for the first time probably stared at that haori. It was unusual. It broke the visual rules of how clothing is supposed to look. Normal haori have balance, symmetry, a design that flows from one side to the other. Giyu's haori had none of that. It looked like two different jackets cut in half and stitched together. It looked deliberate but wrong, intentional but broken. Anyone who knew anything about clothing could see that this wasn't a fashion choice. This was something else. This was a statement, though most people probably didn't know what the statement meant. But Giyu knew. Every time he put on that haori, every time he felt the weight of it on his shoulders, every time he looked down and saw red on one side and geometric patterns on the other, he knew exactly what he was wearing. He was wearing death. Two deaths, specifically. The deaths of the only two people who'd ever loved him enough to die for him. The solid red half came from Tsutako's haori, the one she owned when she was alive, the one she probably wore during normal days when she took care of her younger brother and planned her wedding. After she died the night before that wedding, Giyu kept her haori. He couldn't save her, couldn't protect her, couldn't stop the demon that took her life, but he could keep this piece of her. He could take her red haori and cut it in half and wear it forever. The geometric patterned half came from Sabito's kimono, that green fabric with the hexagon designs in yellow and darker green that Sabito wore during their training together, during final selection, during the last moments of his life when he was saving everyone on that mountain. After Sabito died fighting the hand demon, after Giyu learned his best friend was gone, after understanding that Sabito had spent his final hours protecting people, including Giyu himself, Giyu took Sabito's kimono. He took that geometric pattern fabric and cut it to match the red half from Tsutako, and he sewed them together down the middle. This wasn't something he did casually. This wasn't grabbing random fabric and making a jacket. Giyu deliberately created a haori from the clothing of two dead people. He took physical pieces of Tsutako and Sabito and wore them on his body every single day. He made their deaths visible. He turned his guilt into a garment. Every demon slayer who saw Giyu saw that split haori without understanding that they were looking at a memorial, a grave marker, a constant reminder that Giyu was only alive because two people weren't. Think about what it means to wear that every day. Most people keep photos of dead loved ones, or maybe an item they owned, something to remember them by. A watch, a letter, something small and private that you can look at when you miss them. Giyu didn't do that. He made his memories public and permanent. He couldn't take off his grief because his grief was literally sewn into his clothes. Every morning when he got dressed, he put on death. Every mission he went on, he carried Tsutako and Sabito with him. Every time another demon slayer talked to him, they were looking at evidence of his failure to save anyone who mattered to him, even if they didn't know it. The red half was a specific kind of torture because red is such a visible color. It stands out. It catches the eye. Every time Giyu looked down at his right shoulder, he saw that red and probably thought about Tsutako, about the wedding that never happened, about the night she hid him and told him to run while she faced the demon alone, about how she was supposed to wear a wedding dress, not a funeral shroud, about how she died in the dark, protecting a little brother who would grow up hating himself for surviving. That red fabric was all that remained of a life cut short, dreams abandoned, a future that never came. The geometric pattern half was different, but equally painful. Those shapes, those colors, green and orange and yellow in careful patterns, they were Sabito. They represented the boy who'd become Giyu's brother through shared training and shared pain. The boy who slapped him for wanting to die and then held out his hand in friendship. The boy who saved everyone during final selection, including Giyu himself. The boy whose body stayed on that mountain while Giyu walked away. Every time Giyu saw those geometric patterns on his left side, he thought about final selection, about passing without killing a single demon, about being unconscious while Sabito died fighting, about being a fake demon slayer wearing a dead hero's clothing. The haori was a physical manifestation of survivor's guilt. Most people carry that guilt internally. It weighs on their thoughts, affects their choices, makes them question their right to be alive. Giyu made his survivor's guilt external. He wore it. He displayed it to the world even though the world didn't understand what they were seeing. Other Hashira saw Giyu's strange split haori and probably thought it was just his style. Maybe something related to water breathing. Maybe just a personal preference. They didn't know they were looking at someone who'd sewn himself into his own grief so completely he couldn't separate his identity from his losses. The haori also represented something deeper. Giyu's belief that he existed in pieces, not as a whole person. The split down the middle wasn't just about honoring two different people. It was about Giyu seeing himself as fundamentally divided, broken, incomplete. One half belonged to Tsutako's memory. One half belonged to Sabito's memory. Neither half belonged to Giyu himself. He was just the person wearing the deaths, the walking memorial, the survivor who didn't deserve to survive. The haori showed everyone, without words, that Giyu didn't see himself as his own person. He saw himself as the leftover pieces of two tragedies sewn together and given a heartbeat. For years, Giyu wore this haori through every battle, every mission, every moment of his life as a demon slayer. It became as recognizable as his face. Other demon slayers knew Giyu by that split haori before they knew anything else about him. The water Hashira with the weird jacket that didn't match. The quiet one who never explained anything. The one who seemed cold and distant and impossible to reach. They saw the haori without understanding it was armor. Protection, not against demons, but against getting close to anyone else who might die for him. The haori survived battles that should have destroyed it. Demon claws that could cut through stone. Blood that stained fabric. Weather that wore down cloth. Giyu took care of that haori like it was the most precious thing he owned, because it was. It wasn't just clothing. It was all he had left of Tsutako and Sabito. As long as he wore their fabric, they weren't completely gone. As long as he carried them on his shoulders, their deaths meant something, even if what they meant was constant pain for Giyu. Then came the battle against Muzan Kibutsuji, the Demon King, the source of every demon that ever existed. This was the final battle. Every remaining Hashira, every demon slayer who could still fight, everyone threw themselves at Muzan in a desperate attempt to end the demon threat forever. The battle was brutal. Demon slayers died. Hashira fell. Muzan's power was unlike anything they'd faced before. Faster than upper moons, stronger than anything human, capable of attacks that tore through bodies and defenses like paper. During this battle, Giyu's haori was shredded. The story specifically tells us this. His haori, that precious memorial he'd worn for years, was torn apart during the fight against Muzan. We don't know the exact moment it happened. Maybe it was one of Muzan's whip-like attacks. Maybe it was when debris from the collapsing Infinity Castle sliced through everything. Maybe it was gradual damage from hours of fighting. What matters is the result. The haori that Giyu had protected for years, had worn through countless battles, had kept intact as the last physical connection to Tsutako and Sabito, was destroyed. Imagine what that must have felt like for Giyu in the middle of the battle. Not just losing a piece of clothing, but losing the last pieces of the two people who defined his entire existence. The red fabric from Tsutako, torn. The geometric pattern from Sabito, ripped. Years of carrying their deaths on his shoulders, and now even that was being taken away. Even the memorial was dying. It probably felt like losing them all over again, watching the fabric tear, knowing that something irreplaceable was being destroyed and he couldn't do anything to stop it. But Giyu survived the battle. He lost his right arm to Muzan's attacks. He was knocked unconscious. He nearly died multiple times. But when dawn came and Muzan was finally dead and the demon threat was eliminated forever, Giyu was still alive. Injured, traumatized, missing an arm, but alive. And while he was recovering from his wounds, while he was in a coma from the damage his body had taken, something important happened. Nezuko Kamado repaired his haori. Nezuko, the demon girl that Giyu had protected way back at the beginning. The one he'd violated the Demon Slayer Corps' rules to save. The one he'd bet his life on by promising to commit ritual suicide if she ever ate a human. She took Giyu's shredded haori and sewed it back together. The story tells us she restored most of it thanks to her sewing skills. She carefully put the pieces back together, matched the patterns, made sure the red half and geometric half were both repaired, made it whole again. When Giyu woke up from his coma and saw what Nezuko had done, he was deeply touched. This is specifically stated in the story. He was very moved by her action. Here was someone who'd spent the entire series unable to speak because of her demon transformation. Someone who'd been more concerned with protecting her brother than thinking about herself. Someone who'd just been turned back into a human after years as a demon, and she'd spent time carefully repairing the haori of someone who'd protected her family. Giyu's response was to send Nezuko many gifts, lots of them. Hairpins, Western-style kimonos, different accessories. He basically showered her with presents as a way of saying thank you. Though knowing Giyu, he probably didn't actually say thank you with words. He just sent gifts and hoped she'd understand what they meant. Zenitsu, who had feelings for Nezuko, got jealous about all the attention Giyu was giving her. But for Giyu, the gifts weren't about romance or attraction. They were about gratitude so deep he didn't know how to express it except through actions. Because Nezuko repairing that haori meant something profound. She took the physical manifestation of Giyu's guilt and grief and made it whole again. She looked at fabric that represented years of pain and survivor's guilt and death. And she decided it was worth saving, worth repairing, worth putting back together. She didn't know the full story of what that haori meant. She probably didn't know about Satako or understand Giyu's connection to Sabito. But she knew it mattered to him, and that was enough reason to fix it. The act of repairing the haori was symbolic of something happening inside Giyu too. For years, he'd worn that split haori as evidence that he was broken, divided, incomplete. Two halves of dead people sewn together, no space for Giyu himself. But after the final battle, after surviving when so many didn't, after fighting alongside people who accepted him despite his silence and distance, after being part of something larger than his own guilt, Giyu was starting to heal. Not completely, not easily, but starting. And Nezuko repairing the haori reflected that. The memorial could be damaged and still be put back together. The grief could be worn thin and still be made whole. The guilt could be torn apart and still be sewn up again. Giyu would continue wearing that haori after it was repaired, but maybe it meant something slightly different now. Still a memorial to Tsuko and Sabito, yes. Still a reminder of the two people who died for him, absolutely. But also proof that broken things can be fixed. That something shredded in battle can be restored. That even the most painful memories can be carried forward without destroying the person carrying them. The haori was still split down the middle, still two different patterns, still visibly divided. But it was whole again, and maybe, just maybe, so was Giyu. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Yet wearing the deaths of two people who'd sacrificed everything for him was only part of Giyu's story, because he didn't just carry their memories on his shoulders, transformed his own emotional death into a fighting technique that would define him as the water Hashira. Dead calm, the technique that mirrors the soul. Water breathing was one of the oldest and most fundamental fighting styles in the Demon Slayer Corps. The Demon Slayer Corps, it wasn't about actually controlling water or creating real waves. It was about moving like water moves, fighting like water fights. Water flows around obstacles. Water adapts to whatever container it's in. Water can be gentle like rain or destructive like a tsunami. Water breathing taught demon slayers to copy these qualities with a sword, making their movements fluid and flexible and powerful all at once. The style had 10 forms, 10 specific sword techniques that had been passed down through generations of water-breathing users. Each form had a name and a purpose. The first form, Water Surface Slash, was a single powerful horizontal cut meant to decapitate demons quickly. The second form, Water Wheel, involved jumping and spinning to deliver a circular slash. The third form, Flowing Dance, created multiple flowing strikes that adapted to the enemy's movements. Each form built on the previous ones, teaching Demon Slayers different ways to attack, defend, and move during battle. These 10 forms were considered complete. They covered everything a water-breathing user needed to know: quick attacks, powerful strikes, defensive moves, techniques for multiple enemies, ways to handle different situations. Students learned all 10 forms, mastered them through years of practice, and then used them to fight demons. The 10 forms had worked for decades, maybe centuries. They'd been tested in countless battles. They'd killed countless demons. They were proven, reliable, effective. Nobody thought water breathing needed an 11th form because the 10 that existed already worked perfectly fine. But Giyu Tomioka created one anyway. Somewhere during his years as a demon slayer, after becoming the water Hashira, after fighting demons and surviving battles and carrying the weight of Sutako and Sabito's deaths every single day, Giyu developed a technique that no other water-breathing user had ever thought to create. He called it the 11th form. Its name was Lull, though many people know it by its English translation, Dead Calm. The technique was unlike anything in the traditional 10 forms. Those forms were all about movement, jumping, spinning, flowing, striking, attacking. They were active. They required the user to do something, to move their body in specific ways, to generate momentum and power. But the 11th form was the opposite. It required the user to stop moving completely, to cease all body movements, to enter a state of total stillness, complete tranquility, absolute calm. Here's how it worked. Giyu would stand perfectly still, holding his sword, and stop moving. Not just stop attacking, stop everything. No shifting weight, no adjusting grip, no preparation for the next move. Just perfect stillness, like a statue, like someone who'd turned to stone. And in that stillness, in that moment of complete calm, Giyu could defend against any attack coming at him. His sword would move to block, deflect, or cut through incoming strikes. But the movements were so fast, they were basically invisible. One moment, an attack would be flying toward Giyu. The next moment, it would be stopped or redirected or sliced apart, and Giyu would still be standing in the same position, looking like he hadn't moved at all. The speed was the key. Normal humans can't see things that happen too fast. A hummingbird's wings beat so quickly they blur. Lightning strikes faster than eyes can track. Giyu's sword movements during Dead Calm were like that. So fast that to anyone watching, it looked like the attacks just stopped on their own, like they hit an invisible wall and fell apart. But really, Giyu was moving his sword at speeds that human eyes couldn't register, making tiny, precise cuts and blocks and deflections that happened between one heartbeat and the next. When Giyu used this technique, he visualized something specific. In his mind, he saw himself standing in the middle of a raging ocean. Waves crashing, water churning, chaos and violence all around him. And then, in an instant, that raging ocean would calm. The waves would flatten. The chaos would stop. Everything would become perfectly still, like a clear pool of water reflecting the sky, smooth as glass, absolutely tranquil. The raging ocean represented the incoming attacks, the danger, the violence of battle. The calm pool represented Dead Calm itself, the moment when all that chaos was nullified, stopped, made harmless. The first time we see Giyu use this technique in the story is during his fight against Rui, the demon who was Lower Moon 5. Rui was one of the 12 Kizuki, the most powerful demons under Muzan's direct command. Rui's special ability involved threads. He could create incredibly strong threads from his body and use them as weapons. These threads could cut through almost anything: stone, wood, flesh, bone. Rui's threads sliced through them all like they were nothing. He'd been using these threads to trap and kill demon slayers, and he'd nearly killed Tanjiro before Giyu arrived. When Giyu stepped in to fight Rui, the demon immediately attacked with one of his strongest techniques: cutting thread rotation. Rui created threads and spun them in a rotating pattern, basically creating a sphere of cutting wires that would slice apart anything they touched. It was an attack that covered a wide area, that came from multiple angles, that should have been impossible to defend against completely. Any normal defense would get cut through. Any normal attempt to block would leave openings. But Giyu used Dead Calm. He stopped moving. He stood perfectly still. And every single thread that Rui launched at him was cut apart before it could touch him. All of them. Dozens of threads, maybe hundreds, all moving at high speed, all sharp enough to cut through stone. And Gyu's sword cut through every single one. So fast, it looked like he hadn't moved at all. Rui's threads just fell apart around Gyu, rendered completely harmless. To Rui, it must have looked impossible. One moment, his strongest attack was flying toward this demon slayer. The next moment, the attack just stopped existing. And the demon slayer was still standing in the same spot with the same calm expression. Then Gyu moved forward and decapitated Rui in the blink of an eye. The demon didn't even see it coming. One moment Rui was alive, the next moment his head was separated from his body, and he was dying. Gyu had cut through a lower moon demon so easily, so quickly, that it looked effortless. No long battle, no struggle, just dead calm to nullify the demon's attack, then one clean cut to end the fight. That's how powerful the 11th form was when used by someone as skilled as Gyu. But here's the thing about dead calm that makes it more than just a fighting technique. It had a weakness, a very specific limitation that the story explicitly tells us about. Dead calm could be broken through by overwhelming successive attacks. If someone attacked fast enough, if they kept attacking without stopping, if they piled on so many strikes that even Gyu's impossible speed couldn't keep up, then dead calm would fail. The defense would break down. The attacks would get through. The calm would shatter. This limitation is crucial to understanding what dead calm really represents. Because dead calm wasn't just a sword technique that Gyu invented to fight demons better. It was a perfect mirror of Gyu's emotional state. It was his psychology made physical. It was the way he survived his guilt and grief turned into a fighting style. Think about it. Gyu spent years after Final Selection shutting down his emotions, refusing to feel things, creating a state of internal numbness where nothing could hurt him because he wouldn't let himself feel anything. He became still inside, calm inside, dead inside. He built walls around his heart so high and thick that nothing could get through. That's exactly what dead calm does. It creates perfect stillness, perfect calm, perfect defense. Nothing gets through. All attacks are nullified. Everything that tries to harm you is stopped before it can reach you. Gyu took his emotional coping strategy, the way he protected himself from pain by feeling nothing, and turned it into a sword technique. He made his numbness into a weapon. He transformed his emotional death into an actual fighting style called dead calm. The name itself tells you everything. Dead, as in not alive, not feeling, not responding. Calm, as in still water, no waves, no movement. Dead calm was Gyu showing the world exactly what had happened to his heart. And the limitation of the technique? The fact that overwhelming successive attacks could break through? That mirrored his emotional state too. Because no matter how much Gyu tried to feel nothing, no matter how many walls he built, no matter how completely he shut down his emotions, there were things that could break through. Overwhelming grief. Successive tragedies. Too many losses piled on top of each other. Tsutako's death was one hit. Sabito's death was another hit. Passing Final Selection without earning it was another hit. Becoming a Hashira while believing he didn't deserve it was another hit. Years of isolation and guilt and survivor's syndrome, all of it piling up, attacking his defenses over and over, and eventually even dead calm couldn't hold forever. When Gyu used dead calm in battle, he entered a state where nothing could touch him. When Gyu used dead calm in his life, he entered a state where nothing could reach him emotionally. Both versions of dead calm were perfect defenses. Both had the same weakness. They could be overwhelmed if the attacks kept coming, if the pressure never let up, if someone was determined enough to break through the calm and reach the person underneath. The technique also revealed something about how Gyu saw combat versus how he saw life. During battles, Gyu was incredibly skilled, almost impossibly talented with a sword. He could create entirely new techniques that other water-breathing masters had never thought of. He could fight upper moon demons and survive. He was objectively one of the strongest demon slayers alive. But in his personal life, Gyu saw himself as weak, unworthy, fraudulent. He separated combat ability from personal value. He could acknowledge being good at fighting, while simultaneously believing he was worthless as a person. Dead calm represented this split, a technique that proved his skill while having a name that represented his emotional death. Gyu used dead calm again during his battle with Akaza, the Upper Moon 3 demon. Akaza was incomparably stronger than Rui. Where Rui was Lower Moon 5, Akaza was Upper Moon 3, the third strongest demon in existence besides Muzan himself. Akaza had killed Kyojuro Rengoku, the Flame Hashira, one of the strongest and most skilled Hashira of the generation. Akaza was fast enough and strong enough to overwhelm most demon slayers in seconds. When Akaza attacked Giyu with cutting thread rotation, not Rui's threads, but Akaza's own attack, Giyu used Dead Calm to nullify it. The scene is significant because it shows Dead Calm working against an Upper Moon demon, someone vastly stronger than Rui. Akaza's attacks were faster, more powerful, more dangerous. But Giyu's Dead Calm cut through them anyway. He stood perfectly still, stopped all movement, and Akaza's attack fell apart around him. For a moment, Giyu was completely safe, completely protected, completely untouchable. The calm held. The defense worked. Nothing got through. But the battle didn't end there. Akaza was too strong for one technique to defeat. He adapted, changed his strategy, kept attacking. And eventually, even with Dead Calm, even with all of Giyu's skill, the sheer overwhelming power of an Upper Moon demon was too much. Akaza kicked Giyu and sent him flying, injuring him badly. The calm was broken. The defense was overwhelmed. The attacks got through, just like the technique's limitations said they could. This moment in the battle represented something important about Giyu's character arc. For years, Dead Calm, both the technique and the emotional state, had protected him. He'd survived by feeling nothing, by maintaining perfect stillness, by refusing to let anything touch his heart. But that protection came at a cost. Living in Dead Calm meant not really living at all. It meant existing as a ghost, going through the motions, surviving but never thriving. And eventually, that wasn't sustainable. Eventually, the pressure of being alive while believing he shouldn't be, of being a Hashira while thinking he didn't deserve it, of carrying Sutako and Sabito's deaths without ever processing the grief. It all became too much. The successive attacks on his psyche kept coming, and Dead Calm couldn't hold forever. The fact that Giyu created this technique at all shows how deeply his trauma affected him. Most demon slayers who learned water breathing just used the traditional 10 forms. They were good enough. They worked. There was no need to create new techniques. But Giyu needed something the 10 forms couldn't provide: a way to stop feeling. The traditional forms were about movement, action, engagement with the world. Giyu needed the opposite. He needed stillness. He needed calm. He needed a way to defend himself that required shutting down completely. So he created it. He invented a technique that let him turn his emotional coping strategy into actual combat ability. Dead Calm made Giyu famous among demon slayers who knew about it. It was his signature move, the technique that defined him as the Water Hashira. When other demon slayers talked about Giyu's fighting style, they probably mentioned Dead Calm first. The technique that looked impossible, the defense that seemed perfect. The moment when Giyu would go completely still and suddenly all attacks would just stop working. It was impressive. It was powerful. It was effective. And it was deeply, deeply sad. Because every time Giyu used Dead Calm, he was showing everyone exactly what had happened to him after final selection. He was demonstrating with his own body what it looked like to stop feeling. He was proving that you could survive by becoming still inside, by creating calm where there should be emotion, by making yourself dead in all the ways that matter while your heart kept beating. The technique was brilliant and tragic at the same time. Brilliant because it worked so well in combat. Tragic because it represented a person who'd shut down so completely he'd turned his numbness into his greatest strength. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But Dead Calm was just the external proof of what Giyu had become inside, and his belief that he wasn't a real Hashira, that he didn't deserve the title or the respect or the position, would create even more walls between himself and the people who should have been his equals. Section 6. The Hashira who believed he wasn't one. At age 16 or 17, just a few years after surviving final selection, Giyu Tomioka was recognized by Kagaya Ubuyashiki and named the Water Hashira. The Hashira were the 9 strongest demon slayers in the entire Demon Slayer Corps, the elite fighters who could take on the most dangerous demons and survive. Becoming a Hashira wasn't something you could achieve through luck or connections. You earned it by killing demons, lots of them, and proving you had the skill to face threats that would kill normal demon slayers instantly. Being named a Hashira meant the leader of the entire organization looked at you and decided you were one of the best fighters humanity had. Giyu should have been proud. Most demon slayers spend their entire careers hoping to maybe, possibly, eventually reach Hashira level, and most never do. They fight demons for years and die without ever getting close to that kind of recognition. But Giyu became a Hashira while still a teenager, which meant he'd proven himself exceptional in an incredibly short time. The leader of the Demon Slayer Corps saw something in Giyu that deserved the title, the position, the respect, the acknowledgement that he stood among the strongest. But Giyu didn't believe he deserved any of it. Not the title, not the position, not the respect, not the acknowledgement. Because in his mind, he wasn't a real demon slayer at all. He was a fraud who'd passed final selection without killing a single demon. A boy who survived because his best friend died saving him. Someone who wore the title of Water Hashira, but had stolen it from Sabito, who should have been standing in this position instead. Every time someone called Giyu the Water Hashira, he probably heard Sabito's name in his head. Every time someone showed him respect as a Hashira, he probably thought about how Sabito deserved that respect more. Every time he stood with the other 8 Hashira, he probably felt like an imposter surrounded by people who actually earned their places. This belief that he wasn't a real Hashira, that he didn't belong, affected everything about how Giyu acted around other demon slayers. He kept his distance. He didn't talk much. He didn't explain himself or his decisions. He didn't try to make friends or build relationships with the other Hashira. He stayed separate, isolated, observing from far away like he wasn't really part of the group. When meetings happened and all the Hashira gathered together, Giyu would show up but remain quiet, contributing only when absolutely necessary, leaving as soon as possible. The other Hashira noticed this, obviously. They saw Giyu standing apart. They heard his silence. They watched him leave without engaging, and they made assumptions about what it meant. Most of them assumed Giyu thought he was better than them, that his distance was arrogance, that his silence was him looking down on others, that when Giyu said he was different from the other Hashira, he meant he was superior, stronger, above them somehow. They interpreted his isolation as pride rather than shame. This interpretation made some sense from the outside. Giyu was incredibly skilled. He'd created his own technique, the 11th form of water breathing, something no other water breathing user had ever done. He could defeat powerful demons with ease. He'd become a Hashira at a very young age. From the outside, it looked like Giyu had every reason to be proud, every reason to think highly of himself. So when he acted distant and separate, when he said he was different from them, it seemed like arrogance, like someone so talented he couldn't be bothered to interact normally with his peers. But they had it completely backward. Giyu wasn't acting superior, he was acting inferior. He wasn't distancing himself because he thought he was better than them. He was distancing himself because he thought he was worse. He didn't belong with the Hashira because they'd earned their positions and he hadn't. They were real demon slayers who'd proven themselves. He was a fake, wearing a title that should belong to a dead boy. When Giyu said he was different from the other Hashira, he didn't mean better. He meant unworthy, not real, not deserving to stand with them. Shinobu Kocho, the insect Hashira, was one of the few who spent significant time around Giyu. They were often assigned missions together, working as partners across Japan. Shinobu was observant, intelligent, and better at reading people than most. She noticed things others missed, and at some point she told Giyu directly that the other Hashira disliked him. She said this to his face, informing him that his peers didn't have positive feelings toward him. Giyu's reaction tells you everything about his mindset. He was shocked, genuinely surprised. The story specifically mentions that he expressed shock when Shinobu said this. He hadn't realized the other Hashira disliked him. He wasn't intentionally pushing them away or deliberately being unlikable. He was just existing in the way he thought he should exist, separate, quiet, undeserving of their friendship, and somehow that had made them dislike him without him even noticing. This is what happens when you're so focused on your own unworthiness that you don't realize how your behavior affects others. Giyu thought he was just staying out of the way, not bothering people who deserved their positions more than he did. He didn't realize he was coming across as cold, arrogant, and impossible to connect with. Part of the problem was Giyu's communication style, or rather, his complete lack of communication. Giyu was famous among demon slayers for leaving out critical information, for not explaining his reasoning, for making decisions that confused everyone because he never bothered to clarify why he made them. He'd do something important and just assume everyone would understand without explanation. He'd make choices that seemed strange and never provide context. He'd act in ways that looked questionable and remain silent when people asked him about it. This created constant misunderstandings. People would see Giyu do something, try to understand why, fail to figure it out because Giyu wouldn't explain, and then make up their own explanations that were usually wrong. When Giyu protected Nezuko, a demon, from being killed by Shinobu, he didn't explain why. He just physically stopped Shinobu from doing her job and stayed silent when she demanded to know his reasoning. From Shinobu's perspective, this looked insane. A Hashira protecting a demon for no apparent reason, refusing to justify himself, just expecting everyone to accept his decision without explanation. She had no way of knowing that Giyu had seen something special in Nezuko and Tanjiro, that he believed they deserved a chance, that he was willing to bet his life on them. He just stopped her and said nothing. This pattern repeated constantly. Giyu would act. Others would be confused. Giyu wouldn't explain. Others would assume the worst. The gap between what Giyu meant and what others understood grew wider and wider, because Giyu couldn't or wouldn't bridge it with words. And this made him seem even more arrogant, even more like someone who thought he didn't owe anyone explanations because he was above them. Sanemi Shinazugawa, the Wind Hashira, particularly clashed with Giyu. Sanemi was aggressive, direct, and had strong opinions about how things should be done. He also had a deep hatred for demons. His own mother had been turned into a demon and killed most of his siblings before he had to kill her. So when Giyu protected Nezuko, when he violated the Demon Slayer Corps' most fundamental rule about killing all demons, Sanemi saw this as betrayal, as weakness, as something unforgivable. And Giyu's refusal to explain himself, his silent acceptance of Sanemi's anger without defending his choices, made everything worse. Sanemi interpreted Giyu's silence and distance as arrogance. He thought Giyu believed himself above the rules, above having to justify his actions, above caring what other Hashira thought. The tension between them grew over time, building into a rivalry where Sanemi actively disliked Giyu, and Giyu just accepted that dislike without trying to fix it. Because from Giyu's perspective, Sanemi was right to dislike him. Sanemi had earned his position as Wind Hashira. Sanemi deserved respect. Giyu didn't. So if Sanemi wanted to hate him, that was fine. That was appropriate. That was what someone who didn't deserve to be there should expect. Years passed like this. Giyu served as Water Hashira, fought demons, completed missions, lived up to the technical requirements of his position. But he never connected with his peers, never built friendships with the other Hashira, never tried to explain himself or bridge the gap between how he saw himself and how they saw him. He just existed, in isolation, surrounded by the 8 other strongest demon slayers in Japan, and somehow remained completely alone. Then came the Hashira training arc. After several Hashira awakened their demon slayer marks, special markings that appeared on demon slayers who pushed past normal human limits, Kagaya Ubuyashiki decided all the Hashira needed to train together to prepare for the final battle against Muzan. Each Hashira would teach their own training session, pushing the other demon slayers to become stronger, helping them try to awaken their own marks. It was a good plan, a necessary plan. Every demon slayer needed to become as strong as possible before facing Muzan, because the final battle would determine whether humanity survived or demons won forever. Every Hashira agreed to participate. Gyome Himejima, the Stone Hashira. Sanemi Shinazugawa, the Wind Hashira. Mitsuri Kanroji, the Love Hashira. Obanai Iguro, the Serpent Hashira. All of them recognized the importance of this training and committed to helping their fellow demon slayers become stronger. Every single Hashira agreed to Ubuyashiki's plan, except Giyu. Giyu refused. He said he wouldn't participate in Hashira training. He wouldn't teach others. He wouldn't help prepare for the final battle. He just flat out rejected the entire idea and started to leave the meeting without explaining why. The other Hashira were furious. Sanemi and Obanai were especially angry, demanding to know what made Giyu think he could just refuse when everyone else had agreed. Shinobu tried to get him to at least explain his reasoning, but Giyu just said he was different from the other Hashira and tried to walk out. From the outside, this looked like the ultimate arrogance. Here was a plan to save humanity, and Giyu was refusing to help because he thought he was too different, too special, too whatever to participate like everyone else. It looked like he was putting himself above the group, above the mission, above the fate of the world. Sanemi moved to physically stop him from leaving. Obanai was ready to fight him over this. The meeting dissolved into chaos because Giyu refused to participate and wouldn't explain why, and everyone assumed it was because he thought he was better than them. But inside Giyu's head, the reasoning was completely different. He refused to participate because he believed he wasn't worthy. The Hashira training was for real Hashira, people who'd earned their positions, people who deserved to teach others. Giyu didn't fall into that category. He was different from them not because he was superior, but because he was a fraud. He passed final selection without killing demons. He became water Hashira through luck, not skill. He didn't deserve to stand with them, didn't deserve to teach others, didn't deserve to act like he was their equal. Participating in Hashira training would be pretending he belonged with them, and he couldn't do that. So he refused. He also believed he couldn't awaken his Demon Slayer mark. Marks appeared on Demon Slayers who pushed past their limits, who proved their worth in battle, who demonstrated they were truly exceptional. Giyu didn't believe he qualified. He thought marks were for real Hashira, not for people who survived through other people's sacrifices. Sabito would have awakened a mark if he'd lived. The other Hashira could awaken marks because they deserved them. But Giyu? He was different. He wasn't worthy of a mark. So there was no point in training for something he could never achieve anyway. Later, when Tanjiro came to talk to him, Giyu explained this directly. He told Tanjiro that Tanjiro should have become the water Hashira instead of him. That Tanjiro followed the path of water breathing, learned from the same master, actually earned his position through hard work and skill. But Giyu hadn't earned anything. He just survived when better people died. He wasn't a real Hashira. He was different. And being different meant he didn't belong with them, didn't deserve to train with them, didn't deserve to act like he was one of them. The tragedy is that Giyu's low opinion of himself created the exact situation he feared. He thought he didn't belong with the other Hashira, so he acted like he didn't belong, which made them think he didn't want to belong, which meant he really didn't belong. His internal belief that he was unworthy made him act distant and uncommunicative, which made others think he was arrogant and unlikable, which gave them reasons to actually dislike him, which confirmed his belief that he shouldn't be there. He created a self-fulfilling prophecy where his shame looked like pride and his isolation looked like superiority. If Giyu had just explained himself, if he'd told the other Hashira about final selection, about passing without killing demons, about Sabito's death, about believing he didn't deserve his position, everything would have been different. They would have understood. They might have disagreed with his assessment of himself, but they would have understood why he felt that way. They would have seen his distance as trauma rather than arrogance. They would have recognized his silence as shame rather than pride. But Giyu couldn't explain because explaining would mean admitting he was a fraud, and he couldn't bear to say out loud what he believed about himself. So the other Hashira continued thinking Giyu was arrogant. Sanemi continued hating him. Obanai continued being annoyed by him. Most of them continued keeping their distance from someone who seemed to want distance. And Giyu continued being alone, surrounded by people who should have been his closest allies, believing he deserved that loneliness because he didn't deserve to be there at all. Years of this. Years of being the water Hashira while believing he wasn't a real Hashira. Years of standing with the 8 strongest demon slayers in Japan while thinking he shouldn't be standing with them. Years of wearing the title and carrying the responsibility while believing both belonged to someone else. Someone dead. Someone who actually deserved them. Years of isolation created by his own trauma, but reinforced by everyone else's misunderstanding of what that trauma meant. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But isolation was exactly what Giyu wanted, because if no one got close, no one else would die protecting him, which meant he could exist in his bubble of guilt without risking anyone else's life. Until a boy with a checkered haori and a demon sister forced his way past all of Giyu's walls without even trying. Section 7. The boy who reminded him of Sabito. The first time Giyu Tomioka met Tanjiro Kamado, he was preparing to kill Tanjiro's sister. This was Giyu's job after all. He was a demon slayer. Demons killed humans. Demon slayers killed demons. The rules were simple and absolute. When Giyu arrived at the Kamado family home in the mountains and found a scene of slaughter, an entire family dead except for one boy and one girl, he immediately understood what had happened. A demon had attacked. The boy, Tanjiro, was human. The girl, Nezuko, was a demon. She'd been transformed. She needed to die. This should have been straightforward. Giyu had killed demons before. He'd killed many demons. Some of them probably begged. Some of them probably seemed human. Some of them probably had families once, lives once, humanity once. But they were demons now, and demons killed humans, so demon slayers killed demons. That was how it worked. That was the entire purpose of the Demon Slayer Corps. Find demons, kill them, save humans, repeat. But when Giyu tried to kill Nezuko, something unexpected happened. Tanjiro threw himself in the way. Not strategically, not with a plan, just pure desperate instinct. His sister was about to die, so he put his body between her and the sword. He begged Giyu to stop. He tried to explain that Nezuko was different, that she was still his sister, that she hadn't hurt anyone yet. He dropped to his knees and pleaded with the stranger to please not kill the only family he had left. Giyu must have seen this kind of thing before. Families of demon victims begging for mercy. People refusing to accept that their loved one was gone, replaced by something that would eventually eat them. The Demon Slayer's job in these moments was to be firm, to explain the reality, to do what needed to be done even if it hurt. Giyu had probably heard 100 different variations of, please don't kill them, they're still in there somewhere. He knew demons weren't still in there. He knew the person was gone. He knew mercy meant death, and hesitation meant more human victims. So Giyu dismissed Tanjiro's pleas. He told Tanjiro not to move, that this was his job, that the demon needed to die. He prepared to kill Nezuko, despite Tanjiro's begging. And then Nezuko did something that changed everything. She protected Tanjiro. Not attacked him, not tried to eat him, protected him. When Giyu moved to strike, when it looked like he might hurt Tanjiro while Tanjiro was blocking the way to Nezuko, Nezuko moved between them. She put herself in front of her brother. She protected a human from a demon slayer, even though demon slayers are what demons should fear most. She chose protecting her brother over her own survival. A demon, a creature that should only think about eating and killing, chose to protect someone. Giyu stopped. He looked at these two siblings, one human, one demon, and saw something he'd never seen before. He saw a demon acting human. He saw love surviving transformation. He saw a bond strong enough that neither sibling would let the other die, even though one of them was supposed to be a monster now. And Giyu, who'd spent years believing everyone he loved died protecting him, who understood exactly what it meant to have someone throw themselves in front of death for you, recognized something in this moment. These siblings were unique. Different, special in a way that might matter. Giyu couldn't know for sure. Maybe Nezuko would eventually lose her humanity and become a normal demon. Maybe this protective instinct would fade. Maybe Tanjiro would die because Giyu made the wrong choice. But there was a chance, small but real, that these two were different. That Nezuko could be the first demon to retain her humanity. That not all demons needed to die immediately without question. So Giyu made a choice that violated everything the Demon Slayer Corps stood for. He let Nezuko live. He didn't kill her. He didn't report her. He told Tanjiro to find a man named Sekonji Orokodaki, who lived on Mount Sagiri, gave some brief directions, and then left. He walked away from a demon he should have killed, trusting that maybe, possibly, this one time would be different. This decision was massive. If Giyu was wrong, if Nezuko became a regular demon and killed people, those deaths would be Giyu's fault. He knew this. He understood the risk. But he took it anyway, because something about Tanjiro and Nezuko reminded him of something important, something he'd almost forgotten in his years of guilt and isolation. He saw their determination to protect each other and remembered having that with Sabito. He saw Tanjiro refusing to give up on his sister, and remembered Sabito refusing to give up on him. He saw love surviving impossible circumstances, and remembered that once, briefly, he'd had that too. Sending Tanjiro to Urokodaki was significant for another reason. Urokodaki was Giyu's own teacher. the man who'd trained both Giyu and Sabito, the former water Hashira who lived on the same mountain where Giyu had collapsed after running from his sister's death. By sending Tanjiro there, Giyu was putting Tanjiro on the exact same path he and Sabito had walked. He was giving Tanjiro the same chance they'd had: train under Orokodaki, learn water breathing, become strong enough to protect what mattered. Giyu must have known what this meant. Sending Tanjiro to Orokodaki meant Tanjiro would learn the same techniques Giyu learned, would sleep in the same house Giyu slept in, would train on the same mountain where Giyu and Sabito became brothers, would eventually take final selection like they did. Every step Tanjiro took would be a step Giyu had taken years earlier. Every part of Tanjiro's journey would echo Giyu's past, and the parallels between Tanjiro and Sabito were impossible to miss. Both lost their families to demons. Both had that specific kind of determination that comes from having everything taken away and deciding to fight back anyway. Both were self-sacrificing, willing to throw themselves in danger to protect others, unable to walk past someone in trouble without helping. Both had a strong sense of justice that went beyond just wanting revenge. They wanted to protect people, to make sure no one else suffered like they'd suffered, to be the shield between humanity and demons. Both became water-breathing users. Tanjiro learned from the same master as Sabito. He practiced the same forms. He developed the same flowing, adaptive fighting style. When Giyu watched Tanjiro fight later in the story, he saw water-breathing techniques he recognized, movements that looked familiar, a style that reminded him of training with Sabito years ago. Tanjiro was following Sabito's path almost exactly, becoming the person Sabito would have become if he'd survived. This had to hurt Giyu. Every time he looked at Tanjiro, he probably thought about Sabito. Every time Tanjiro used water breathing, Giyu probably remembered training with his best friend. Every time Tanjiro showed determination and courage and that refusal to give up, Giyu probably saw the boy with the peach-colored hair and the scar who'd saved everyone at final selection. Tanjiro was a living reminder of what Giyu had lost, but also proof that Sabito's kind of goodness could exist in the world again. The next major interaction between Giyu and Tanjiro happened at Mount Natsugumo. Tanjiro and his friends had been sent there on a mission, but the mountain was controlled by a family of demons led by Rui, the Lower Moon 5. Tanjiro fought Rui and nearly died. Rui was too strong, too fast, his threat attacks too deadly. Tanjiro tried everything he could, pushed himself past his limits, used techniques he barely knew how to use, and it wasn't enough. Rui was about to kill him when Giyu arrived. Giyu saved Tanjiro's life. He stepped between Tanjiro and Rui, told Tanjiro he'd done well holding out this long, and said he'd take care of the rest. Then, Giyu used Dead Calm to nullify Rui's strongest attack and decapitated the demon so quickly Rui didn't even see the strike coming. The entire fight lasted seconds. Giyu defeated a Lower Moon demon, one of the 12 Kizuki, with such ease that it looked effortless. He saved Tanjiro without breaking a sweat, without taking damage, without even looking like he'd been in a real fight. After Rui was dead, after Tanjiro had a moment of sympathy for the dying demon, Giyu saw Nezuko. He realized these were the siblings from that day in the mountains, the ones he'd spared, the ones he'd sent to Orokodaki. They'd survived. Tanjiro had become a demon slayer. Nezuko still hadn't eaten any humans. His gamble had paid off so far. These two were still special, still different, still worth protecting. Then, Shinobu Kocho showed up. The insect Hashira had also been sent to Mount Natsugumo, and when she saw Nezuko, she immediately moved to kill the demon. This was protocol. This was what demon slayers did. Shinobu was just following the rules, doing her job, eliminating a demon like she'd eliminated hundreds of demons before. But Giyu physically stopped her. He held her back, prevented her from reaching Nezuko, told Tanjiro to run. This was insane from Shinobu's perspective. A fellow Hashira was protecting a demon, preventing her from doing her job, violating the most fundamental rule of the Demon Slayer Corps. She demanded an explanation. Giyu gave her none. He just held her there, using his superior strength to keep her from chasing Tanjiro and Nezuko, accepting her anger without defending himself. When she finally demanded to know why, he remained silent. Only when a crow arrived with orders to bring both Kamado siblings to headquarters did the confrontation end. Giyu's protection of Nezuko cost him. It made Shinobu question his judgment. It made the other Hashira suspicious when they found out. It gave people more reasons to think he was strange, unreliable, someone who broke rules for inexplicable reasons. But Giyu did it anyway, because he'd made a choice 2 years earlier to believe in these siblings, and he wasn't going to back down now. He'd given them a chance to prove demons could be different. He wasn't going to let Shinobu kill Nezuko before they had that chance. At the Hashira meeting that followed, when all 9 Hashira gathered to decide what to do about a demon slayer traveling with a demon, Giyu went even further. He and Urokodaki both sent letters saying they would commit seppuku, ritual suicide by cutting open their own stomachs, if Nezuko ever ate a human. They were betting their lives on this demon staying in control. They were saying if they were wrong, if Nezuko killed someone, they'd take responsibility with their deaths. This is probably the strongest statement Giyu ever made about anything. He was silent about his own past. He didn't explain his feelings, or defend his choices, or open up about his trauma. But he was willing to publicly promise to kill himself if he was wrong about Nezuko. That's how much he believed in these siblings. That's how important protecting them was to him. He saw something in Tanjiro and Nezuko worth dying for, worth betting everything on, worth violating the corp's rules to defend. As time passed, Giyu watched Tanjiro grow. The boy who'd been groveling on his knees begging for his sister's life became a skilled fighter. The one who nearly died to Rui became strong enough to fight upper moon demons. Tanjiro learned new techniques, developed his own style, became confident and capable in ways that reminded Giyu even more of Sabito. During the battle with Akaza, when Tanjiro fought alongside Giyu against an upper moon, Giyu was amazed by how much Tanjiro had improved. He saw Tanjiro's abilities and thought this was Hashira-level skill, that Tanjiro had become one of the strongest demon slayers despite his short time in the Corps. This growth meant something to Giyu. He'd sent Tanjiro to Urokodaki, hoping the boy might survive, might become a demon slayer, might protect his sister. But Tanjiro had exceeded those hopes. He'd become exceptional. He'd proven that determination and heart could overcome terrible circumstances. He'd shown that losing everything doesn't mean giving up. He was living proof that Sabito's kind of strength, the kind that comes from protecting others, could exist and thrive and matter. But Tanjiro did something even more important for Giyu than becoming strong. He refused to let Giyu stay isolated. Most people accepted Giyu's distance, his silence, his walls. They assumed he wanted to be left alone, that he preferred isolation, that trying to reach him was pointless. But Tanjiro kept trying anyway. He saw past the stoic expression and the cold demeanor to the person underneath. He recognized pain when he saw it because he carried his own pain. He understood loss because he'd lost his entire family. And he couldn't walk past someone suffering without trying to help, even if that person was the water Hashira, who seemed completely unreachable. When Ubuyashiki asked Tanjiro to convince Giyu to participate in Hashira training, Tanjiro didn't just have one conversation and give up. He kept coming back. He kept pushing. He kept trying to understand why Giyu refused, what was holding him back, what made him believe he didn't belong with the other Hashira. And eventually, Giyu told him the truth. About final selection, about Sabito, about passing without killing demons, about being a fraud wearing a title he didn't earn. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. And Tanjiro, this boy who reminded Giyu so much of his dead best friend, would ask him one question that finally shattered the dead calm Giyu had maintained for years. The question that broke the dam. When Kagaya Ubuyashiki asked Tanjiro to talk to Giyu about participating in Hashira training, Tanjiro probably knew this wouldn't be easy. Giyu wasn't known for opening up. He didn't explain himself. He didn't He didn't share his feelings. He barely spoke at all most of the time. Convincing him to change his mind about something he'd already refused would require breaking through years of walls, getting past all the defenses Giyu had built around his heart, reaching the person buried under all that guilt and silence. But Tanjiro had one advantage. He was relentless, in the specific way that breaks through to people who've given up on themselves. He didn't accept surface-level answers. He didn't give up when someone pushed him away. He'd spent his entire journey as a demon slayer, refusing to give up on his sister when everyone said demons couldn't be saved. He'd kept fighting when fight seemed impossible. He'd kept believing when belief seemed foolish. That same determination applied to people too. If Tanjiro thought someone needed help, he'd keep trying to help them no matter how many times they refused. So Tanjiro went to find Giyu, not just once, but multiple times. He sought him out, tried to start conversations, attempted to understand what was going on in the water Hashira's head. At first, Giyu probably gave him nothing. Short answers, silence, that blank expression that revealed nothing. The same walls he showed everyone else. Most people would have given up after the first or second attempt. Giyu clearly didn't want to talk, clearly wanted to be left alone, clearly wasn't interested in explaining himself. But Tanjiro kept coming back. He kept asking questions. He kept pushing, gently but persistently, trying to understand why Giyu wouldn't help with training when the fate of humanity might depend on every demon slayer becoming as strong as possible. Why would someone refuse to help? What could make a Hashira, one of the 9 strongest fighters in the organization, decide they shouldn't teach others? What was Giyu thinking? Eventually, under Tanjiro's persistent questioning, Giyu started to crack. Not all at once, not easily, but slowly, piece by piece, he began to let some truth out. He told Tanjiro that he should have been the water Hashira instead of Giyu. That Tanjiro followed the proper path, learned from Urokodaki, mastered water breathing, earned his position through hard work and skill. That Tanjiro deserved the title more than Giyu did. That Giyu wasn't a real Hashira at all. Tanjiro must have been confused by this. He looked at Giyu and saw one of the strongest demon slayers alive. Someone who'd saved his life. Someone who could defeat lower moon demons with ease. Someone who'd created an entirely new technique for water breathing. Someone who clearly had the skill and power of a Hashira. How could this person think he wasn't a real Hashira? How could someone so obviously qualified believe he didn't deserve his position? So Tanjiro kept asking, kept pushing, and eventually, Giyu told him the full story. About final selection, about training with Sabito for 2 years, about how they went into the exam together, 2 best friends ready to become demon slayers side by side, about getting injured on the first day, about being knocked unconscious on the 6th day, about waking up to find Sabito dead and himself somehow alive, and the crucial detail, the thing that had poisoned Giyu's self-image for years. He passed final selection without killing a single demon. Not one. 0. While Sabito killed demon after demon, while Sabito saved every other candidate on that mountain, while Sabito died protecting people, Giyu was unconscious. He contributed nothing. He killed nothing. He survived purely by luck and by Sabito's sacrifice. Every other person who passed final selection could point to demons they'd killed, battles they'd won, moments they'd proven themselves. Giyu couldn't. He just woke up and found himself alive while better people were dead. This was why Giyu believed he wasn't a real Hashira. Real Hashira earned their positions. They proved themselves worthy through combat, through skill, through doing what demon slayers are supposed to do: kill demons and protect humans. But Giyu's entire career was built on a foundation of luck. He became a demon slayer without earning it. He became water Hashira without deserving it. The title should have gone to Sabito, who actually possessed the skill and courage and strength that Hashira represent. But Sabito was dead, so Giyu got the position by default, by being the surviving student of Urokodaki who knew water breathing. Giyu also told Tanjiro he believed he couldn't awaken his demon slayer mark. The marks appeared on demon slayers who pushed past normal human limits, who proved themselves exceptional in every way. Giyu didn't believe he qualified. He'd seen other Hashira awaken their marks, Muichiro Tokito, Mitsuri Kanroji, and understood these were people who deserved that power. But himself? He was different. He wasn't worthy of a mark because he wasn't worthy of being a Hashira in the first place. Sabito would have awakened a mark if he'd lived. The other Hashira could awaken marks because they'd earned their positions. But Giyu was just a fraud wearing a dead friend's title. This was the core of Giyu's refusal to participate in Hashira training. The training was for real Hashira to teach others, to pass on their knowledge and skill, to help prepare the next generation for battle. Giyu couldn't do that in good conscience. How could he teach others when he hadn't earned the right to be teaching? How could he stand as an example when he was an example of failure and luck, rather than skill and determination? How could he help others awaken their marks when he believed he could never awaken his own? Participating would mean pretending he deserved to be there, and he couldn't do that. Tanjiro listened to all of this. He heard Giyu's pain, his guilt, his belief that he'd stolen a position that belonged to someone else. He understood now why Giyu acted the way he did, why he stayed distant, why he said he was different from the other Hashira. It all made sense, not because Giyu was right, but because trauma makes people believe things about themselves that aren't true. Guilt distorts how you see reality. Survivor syndrome makes you think your survival was wrong instead of recognizing it as the gift someone chose to give you. And Tanjiro, who understood loss and guilt as deeply as anyone, who'd spent years carrying his own family's deaths, who knew what it felt like to blame yourself for things you couldn't control, asked Giyu one simple question that cut through everything. Do you want to continue your life for Sabito? Not, do you want to honor Sabito's memory? Not, do you want to make Sabito proud? Not, what would Sabito want? Just, do you want to continue your life for him? Do you want to live the life Sabito died to give you? Do you want to take the gift he gave you, your survival, your position, your future, and actually use it? Or do you want to waste it by wallowing in guilt about receiving it? This question hit Giyu like a physical blow, because it reframed everything. Giyu had spent years thinking about final selection as the moment he failed Sabito, the moment he proved himself unworthy, the moment he stole what should have been Sabito's future. He'd been focused on what Sabito lost, his life, his chance to become a Hashira, all his potential. He'd been drowning in guilt over being the one who survived when Sabito deserved to survive more. But Tanjiro's question forced him to think about it differently. Sabito didn't die by accident. He didn't die because he was weak or unlucky. He died saving people. He died doing exactly what he wanted to do, protecting others, making sure they survived, being the shield between the weak and danger. Sabito chose to save everyone on that mountain, including Giyu. He chose to fight the hand demon, knowing it might kill him. He chose other people's lives over his own safety. And he made that choice because he believed those lives were worth saving. He believed Giyu's life was worth saving. If Giyu spent his entire life hating himself for surviving, if he refused to accept his position or his title or his worth, if he wasted the life Sabito died to protect, then what did Sabito's death mean? It meant Sabito died for nothing. It meant his sacrifice was pointless. It meant all those people he saved, including Giyu, weren't actually saved at all because they were just walking corpses carrying guilt instead of living people carrying forward his legacy. Tanjiro's question made Giyu remember something specific. The time Sabito slapped him during their training together. The moment when Giyu had fallen into self-pity and decided dying would be easier than living with Sutako's death. Sabito had gotten so angry, had slapped Giyu hard across the face, had threatened to end their friendship, and had told Giyu that his life was a gift from his sister, that Sutako died specifically so Giyu could live, that wishing he died instead was the worst way to honor her sacrifice. Sabito had been right then, and the same logic applied now to Sabito's own death. If Giyu's life was a gift from Sutako, then it was also a gift from Sabito. Both of them chose to die protecting him. Both of them believed his life was worth their sacrifice. Both of them wanted him to live, actually live, not just survive while hating himself. Sabito hadn't saved Giyu's life at final selection so Giyu could spend years believing he shouldn't be alive. Sabito saved him because he thought Giyu deserved to live, deserved to become a demon slayer, deserved to have a future. And in that moment, standing there, talking with Tanjiro, Giyu had a realization that the story tells us explicitly. I only wanted to forget Sabito, to forget my grief. For years, Giyu had been trying not to think about his best friend, trying not to remember their training together, their friendship, the slapping incident, the way Sabito smiled when he held out his hand. Because remembering Sabito meant feeling the pain of losing him, and that pain was unbearable. So Giyu had pushed the memories down, locked them away, tried to forget the person who'd meant everything to him. But forgetting Sabito didn't actually help. It just meant Giyu was alone with his guilt, cut off from the memory of the one person who'd believed in him, unable to hear Sabito's voice in his head telling him his life mattered. By trying to avoid the pain of loss, Giyu had also avoided the love that came before the loss. He'd thrown away the good memories to escape the bad ones. He'd made himself forget the person who would have told him to stop being an idiot and start living. Tanjiro's question brought all of it back. Sabito's face, his voice, his anger when Giyu wanted to give up, his hand held out in friendship, his absolute certainty that Giyu's life had value. And Giyu realized that honoring Sabito didn't mean dying slowly in guilt. It meant living fully with purpose. It meant taking the chance Sabito gave him and doing something worthwhile with it. It meant becoming the Water Hashira not because he stole the title, but because Sabito believed he could be that person. The story tells us what Giyu decided in that moment. He would push his pain aside and come to his senses. He would participate in Hashira training. He would help prepare for the final battle. He would stop acting like he didn't belong with the other Hashira and start accepting that maybe, possibly, he did belong. Not because he was perfect, or because he'd never failed, or because he'd earned everything through pure merit, but because Sabito and Sutako both believed his life was worth living, and continuing to believe otherwise was disrespecting their sacrifices. This was the turning point. The moment when dead calm started to crack. The moment when Giyu stopped running from his grief and started facing it. The moment when he chose to honor the dead by living for them instead of dying slowly because of them. Tanjiro's question, "Do you want to continue your life for Sabito?" broke through years of walls with 6 simple words. It reframed Giyu's entire understanding of his own existence. It transformed his survivor's guilt into survivor's responsibility. It changed "I should have died instead" into "I need to make my survival matter." Giyu agreed to participate in Hashira training. He'd help prepare other demon slayers for battle. He'd stand with the other Hashira as an equal rather than an imposter. He'd stop saying he was different from them because being different meant being unworthy. He'd accept that maybe he did deserve to be there, that maybe Sabito's judgment about his worth was more accurate than his own self-hatred. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But accepting his position and accepting his worth were just the first steps, because the real test would come during a battle against an upper moon demon, where Giyu would finally have to prove to himself that he was worth the sacrifices made for the mark of someone worth saving. The Infinity Castle was Muzan Kibutsuji's domain, a massive structure that existed in its own space, separate from the normal world. It had endless hallways, rooms that shifted and changed, staircases that led nowhere, and doors that opened to impossible places. The entire castle was controlled by a demon named Nakime, who could manipulate the structure with her music, moving rooms around, separating people, trapping demon slayers in mazes of endless corridors. When the final battle began, when the Demon Slayer Corps finally found Muzan and forced him into direct combat, he escaped into the Infinity Castle and pulled the Demon Slayers in with him. Suddenly, everyone was separated. Hashira were split up. Teams were divided. People who'd been standing next to each other seconds ago were now in completely different parts of this impossible build. The castle itself became a weapon, isolating Demon Slayers, making them fight alone, ensuring they couldn't work together effectively. And waiting in various parts of the castle were the remaining Upper Moon demons, the strongest demons besides Muzan himself, ready to kill any demon slayer who crossed their path. Giyu and Tanjiro found themselves running through the castle together, trying to find Muzan, trying to locate the other Hashira, trying to make sense of this impossible place where rooms moved and directions meant nothing. And then they received news that stopped them both cold. Shinobu Kocho had been killed. The insect Hashira, one of the 9 strongest demon slayers, was dead. She'd faced Upper Moon 2, a demon named Doma, and lost. The story specifically tells us that Giyu was shocked by this news. His face showed the emotion, the heartbreak, the pain of learning someone he knew was gone. Shinobu was one of the few Hashira who'd spent significant time with Giyu. They'd been on missions together. She'd talked to him when others didn't. She'd told him the other Hashira disliked him, yes, but she'd done it because she noticed things about him that others missed. She understood him better than most, even if she didn't fully understand everything. And now she was dead, killed by an Upper Moon, another person in Giyu's life who'd died fighting demons. But Giyu and Tanjiro didn't have time to process this grief. They were still running through the castle when suddenly the entire structure shook. Something was moving through the Infinity Castle, with enough force to destroy floors and walls. Something powerful was coming directly toward them, smashing through obstacles, getting closer with every second. Giyu sensed the danger first. Something was right above them, about to break through. The ceiling exploded, debris rained down, and standing in the destruction was Akaza, the Upper Moon 3. the demon who'd killed Kyojuro Rengoku during the Mugen Train mission. The demon who was obsessed with fighting strong opponents, who respected strength above everything else, who'd spent over 100 years becoming one of the most dangerous demons in existence. Akaza looked at Giyu and Tanjiro and smiled. Here were 2 more strong fighters to test himself against. 2 more opponents to crush. 2 more chances to prove his power. Akaza was terrifyingly strong. Upper Moon demons were in a completely different category from the Lower Moons. Where Lower Moon 5, Rui, had nearly killed Tanjiro, and would have if Giyu hadn't intervened, Upper Moon 3 was leagues beyond that. Akaza moved faster than most demon slayers could see. He hit hard enough to break bones through defensive blocks. He had a special ability called Compass Needle that let him sense his opponent's fighting spirit and predict their movements with perfect accuracy. He'd killed countless demon slayers over the years, including Hashira-level fighters, and he'd specifically killed Kyojuro, one of the strongest Hashira of the current generation. Tanjiro attacked first. He'd gotten stronger since Mount Naragumo, much stronger, and he wanted revenge for Rengoku's death. He used his Hinokami Kagura techniques, his own breathing style that wasn't water breathing, and actually managed to land hits on Akaza. He cut through the demon's head at one point. He dodged Akaza's attacks with a technique called Fake Rainbow that created afterimages. For a brief moment, Tanjiro was fighting an Upper Moon demon on almost equal footing. Giyu watched this fight and was amazed. He remembered the boy who'd been groveling on his knees on that mountain, begging for his sister's life. He remembered sending Tanjiro to Urokodaki, with only hope that maybe the kid would survive. He remembered saving Tanjiro from Rui when the boy was completely outmatched. And now here was that same person fighting an Upper Moon, landing hits, holding his own against one of the strongest demons alive. Tanjiro had become Hashira level. He'd proven himself exceptional. He was exactly the kind of demon slayer Sabito would have become. But Akaza was still too strong. When he activated his Compass Needle technique, his ability to sense fighting spirit and predict attacks became perfect. He could tell where strikes were coming from before they happened. He could counter moves before they were fully executed. He could fight multiple opponents simultaneously because he sensed all of them at once. Tanjiro's speed and skill weren't enough against this ability. The fight turned against him quickly. Giyu jumped in to help. He attacked Akaza from behind, trying to catch the demon off guard, trying to give Tanjiro an opening. But Akaza sensed him coming and blocked the strike effortlessly. Now Giyu was in the fight fully, sword drawn, facing the demon who'd killed another Hashira. Akaza looked pleased. Another strong opponent. Another water-breathing user. This would be interesting. They fought. Giyu and Tanjiro worked together, attacking from different angles, trying to overwhelm Akaza's defenses. But the demon was faster than both of them, stronger than both of them, more experienced than both of them. He'd been fighting for over 100 years. He'd killed Hashira before. 2 opponents, even skilled ones, weren't enough to overwhelm him. Then Akaza used one of his techniques against Giyu. The attack came fast, multiple strikes from different directions, the kind of assault that would kill most demon slayers instantly. But Giyu used dead calm. He stopped moving. He entered that state of perfect stillness, perfect tranquility. His sword moved so fast it was invisible, cutting through every single one of Akaza's attacks before they could touch him. The raging ocean became a calm pool. The chaos became stillness. Akaza's technique was completely nullified. Akaza was surprised. Here was a defensive technique he couldn't break through, a water-breathing form he'd never seen before, a level of skill that impressed even him. This water Hashira was different from others This one had created his own technique, something beyond the traditional 10 forms. This one was worth fighting seriously. Then Akaza kicked Giyu, hard. The kind of strike that sends someone flying through the air, that causes severe damage, that reminds you just how strong Upper Moon demons really are. Giyu was launched backward, smashing into walls or floors, pain exploding through his back where Akaza's kick had landed. For a moment, he was out of the fight, trying to recover, trying to push through the pain that made everything difficult. But Giyu got back up. He returned to the battle despite his injuries, despite the pain in his back, despite knowing that Akaza was stronger than him. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. He thought about what he'd discussed with Tanjiro, about Sabito, about Sutako, about living for them instead of dying slowly because of them, about making his survival matter instead of hating himself for surviving. The story tells us Giyu's internal thoughts in this moment. He thought, I must pass on what was entrusted to me. What was entrusted to him? His life. Tsutako and Sabito both gave him that. They died so he could live. They entrusted him with a future. And he needed to pass that forward, to make it mean something, to use the life they gave him to protect others like they'd protected him. He thought, never again will I let family and friends die before my eyes. This was the core of it. Tsutako died while Giyu could do nothing except run. Sabito died while Giyu was unconscious. Shinobu just died fighting Upper Moon too. So many people dead while Giyu survived. But this time, right now, facing Akaza, he could do something. He could fight, he could protect Tanjiro, he could make sure this didn't end with another person dying while he lived. He could finally be strong enough to save someone instead of being saved. He thought about Tsutako and Sabito specifically. Their faces, their sacrifices, the fact that they believed his life was worth their deaths. And he decided they were right. Not because he'd earned it or deserved it or was better than them, but because they chose him. And honoring that choice meant fighting with everything he had. Meant being the water Hashira they believed he could be. Meant protecting people the way they'd protected him. And in that moment of decision, in that choice, to live for them rather than die because of them, in that acceptance that he was worth the sacrifices made for him, Giyu's Demon Slayer mark awakened. The mark appeared on his left cheek. It looked like blood-red fluid, like water flowing, like the water-breathing style he'd mastered and then surpassed. The design had 3 dots and looked like streams of water moving across his face. When the mark activated, everything changed. Giyu's speed increased dramatically, far beyond what he could do normally. His precision improved, his endurance multiplied, his strength grew. The mark gave him abilities that seemed impossible, that pushed him past normal human limits, that let him fight on a level he'd never reached before. He returned to fighting Akaza, and now he was faster. Fast enough to surprise the demon. Fast enough that Akaza, who'd been in complete control of the battle, suddenly had to actually try. Giyu moved so quickly he seemed to appear in Akaza's view, rather than run there. He cut the demon's arms repeatedly. He sliced through Akaza's body. He even cut the demon's neck. Not enough to kill him, since Upper Moons couldn't be killed just by decapitation, but enough to show he could reach vital areas. For the first time in the fight, Giyu and Akaza were on equal footing. An Upper Moon demon, one of the 3 strongest demons besides Muzan himself, was being matched by a Hashira. Akaza actually had to focus, actually had to take the fight seriously, actually had to acknowledge that this water Hashira was exceptionally skilled. Akaza told Giyu directly that he hadn't fought a water Hashira this skilled in 50 years. 50 years. Half a century since Akaza had met someone using water breathing who could match him like this. This was Akaza's way of showing respect, of acknowledging that Giyu had reached a level very few demon slayers ever achieved. Coming from a demon who'd killed countless fighters over more than 100 years, this meant something. This was proof that Giyu wasn't a fraud or an imposter. He was genuinely one of the strongest demon slayers alive. Then Akaza made an offer he only made to the most worthy opponents. He asked Giyu to become a demon, to let Akaza turn him, to join the demon side, to become immortal and keep his strength forever. Akaza only made this offer to fighters he truly respected, people he believed were special enough to deserve eternal life as demons. He'd made the offer to Kyojuro Rengoku before killing him. Now he was making it to Giyu. Giyu refused, of course. He was a demon slayer. He'd spent his entire life fighting demons. He'd lost his sister to a demon. He'd lost Sabito fighting demons. He'd dedicated everything to protecting humans from demons. There was no chance he'd ever accept Akaza's offer. But the fact that the offer was made proved something important. Giyu had reached a level where even Upper Moon demons recognized his worth. Even demons who'd existed for over a century saw him as exceptional. But the battle didn't end with Giyu's mark awakening. Akaza was too strong, too experienced, too good at adapting. After the initial surprise of Giyu's increased speed, Akaza adjusted. He matched Giyu's new tempo. He figured out patterns. He regained control of the fight. The mark made Giyu stronger, yes, but it didn't make him strong enough to beat an Upper Moon alone. Akaza broke Giyu's sword. Just snapped it, leaving Giyu with a broken weapon against a demon who was still at full strength. The fight turned again. Even with his mark, even with his increased abilities, Giyu was losing. He'd proven himself worthy. He'd shown he belonged at the Hashira level. He'd demonstrated that Sabito and Sutako were right to believe in him. But proving worth and winning are different things, and Akaza was still too much. Tanjiro ultimately defeated Akaza, not by being stronger or faster, but by using a strategy that exploited Akaza's compass needle weakness. If you fought without fighting spirit, without killing intent, the compass couldn't track you. Tanjiro figured this out and used it to land the hits that mattered. Giyu supported him throughout, fighting beside him, covering his openings, working together as partners. The battle ended with Akaza's defeat, but it took both of them to make it happen. Giyu had awakened his Demon Slayer mark. He'd proven he was worth the sacrifices made for him. He'd fought an Upper Moon demon and survived. He'd accepted that maybe, possibly, he really was the Water Hashira and deserved to be there. The mark on his face was physical proof that he'd pushed past his limits, that he'd chosen to live fully rather than survive partially, that he'd honored Sabito and Sutako by being the person they believed he could be. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But the mark came with a curse that Giyu didn't fully understand yet, and the greatest test of whether he truly valued his life was still coming, in the form of the demon, King himself, in a battle that would strip away everything Giyu used to protect himself, and leave him with nothing except the choice to keep fighting or give up. Section 10. The battle where dead calm shattered. After Akaza was defeated, after Giyu and Tanjiro survived that battle with their lives and Giyu's newly awakened mark, they still weren't done. Akaza was Upper Moon 3, yes, but he wasn't the final enemy. The real threat, the source of every demon that had ever existed, was still alive somewhere in this endless castle. Muzan Kibutsuji, the Demon King, the first demon, the one who'd started this entire nightmare over 1,000 years ago. He was still out there, and the Demon Slayer Corps needed to find him before he could escape or kill them all. The Infinity Castle continued shifting around them. Nakime, the demon controlling the structure, kept moving rooms and hallways, trying to separate the Demon Slayers, trying to keep them confused and isolated. But eventually, through effort and luck and Yushido's help, Yushido was a demon who sided with the Demon Slayers. They managed to bring everyone to the same place. All the remaining Hashira, Tanjiro and his friends, everyone who'd survived the battles against the Upper Moons. They gathered together in one area of the castle, and there, finally, they found Muzan. Muzan Kibutsuji didn't look like a typical demon. He could change his appearance, had lived for over 1,000 years, and currently looked like a tall man with curly black hair, red eyes, and pale skin. But his power was unlike anything the Demon Slayers had ever faced. He was faster than the Upper Moons, stronger than all of them combined, more dangerous than any demon they'd encountered. Every demon that existed came from him. He'd created them by sharing his blood. Every demon ability, every blood demon art, every monstrous power originated with Muzan, and he'd spent centuries becoming nearly impossible to kill. The battle began with all the remaining Hashira attacking together. Giyu was there, along with Mitsuri Kanroji, the Love Hashira, Obanai Iguro, the Serpent Hashira, Gyome Himejima, the Stone Hashira, and Sanemi Shinazugawa, the Wind Hashira. Tanjiro fought too, along with his friends Zenitsu, Inosuke, and Kanao. Every strong fighter the Demon Slayer Corps had left threw themselves at Muzan in a desperate attempt to kill him before dawn. Because that was the only real weakness demons had. Sunlight. If they could keep Muzan fighting until the sun rose, the sunlight would kill him, even if their swords couldn't. But Muzan was overwhelming. His attacks came from all directions at once. He could transform his body, creating whip-like appendages that sliced through anything they touched. He moved so fast that even Hashira struggled to track him. His regeneration was instant. Cut off his arm and it grew back before the severed piece hit the ground. His blood was poisonous. Any Demon Slayer who got hit by his attacks had Muzan's blood entering their system, poisoning them, weakening them, killing them slowly from the inside. The Hashira attacked with everything they had. Giyu used his water-breathing techniques, including Dead Calm, when Muzan's attacks became too numerous to dodge normally. He stood perfectly still, and his sword cut through Muzan's strikes with that same invisible speed, that same technique that had protected him so many times before. The raging ocean became calm. The chaos became stillness. For a moment, dead calm held against even the Demon King's power. But dead calm had its limitation. Overwhelming successive attacks could break through, and Muzan's attacks were exactly that. Overwhelming, successive, relentless. He didn't stop. Didn't slow down. Didn't give anyone time to breathe or recover. He just kept attacking, kept moving, kept trying to kill everyone at once. The sheer number and speed of his strikes was more than any single technique could defend against indefinitely. At one point during the battle, something crucial happened. Giyu and Sanemi managed to coordinate their attacks in a specific way. They both attacked at the same moment, and their swords clashed against each other while both were cutting into Muzan. The friction and force of two Nichiren swords meeting at high speed during combat caused both blades to turn bright red. This was a special state that made the swords much more effective against demons. Red blades could slow down or hamper even Muzan's incredible regeneration, making the wounds take longer to heal, making the damage actually matter. This moment was significant because it showed Giyu and Sanemi working together perfectly despite their past tension. Sanemi, who disliked Giyu for years, who'd seen him as arrogant and separate, was now coordinating attacks with him in the middle of the most important battle humanity had ever fought. They weren't friends yet, but they were allies, partners. Two Hashira who'd set aside their differences to fight together. Their red blades cut into Muzan and actually hurt him, actually made him bleed in ways that mattered, actually gave the Demon Slayers a chance. But even with red blades, even with all the Hashira working together, even with Tanjiro and his friends providing support, Muzan was winning. The battle wasn't going well. Demon Slayers were getting injured. The poison in Muzan's blood was affecting everyone who'd been hit, slowing them down, making them weaker. Lower-ranked Demon Slayers were dying, throwing their bodies in front of Muzan's attacks to protect the Hashira, sacrificing themselves to buy just a few more seconds of time. Then Muzan unleashed an attack that changed everything. The story describes it as a blitzing quick attack, so fast that almost nobody could react to it. This attack disabled and knocked away all the Demon Slayers except Kanao. Everyone else was hit, thrown backward, injured severely. Giyu was among them. He lost his right arm in this attack. Not injured, lost. Muzan's strike cut through his arm and removed it completely. Giyu went from being a two-armed fighter to someone missing his primary sword arm in an instant. The pain must have been incredible. Losing a limb isn't just painful, it's shocking to your entire system. Your body goes into trauma response. You can pass out from the injury alone, but Giyu was also knocked unconscious by the force of Muzan's attack, so the pain and the impact combined to take him out of the fight completely. He lay there among the other fallen Demon Slayers, unable to help, unable to fight, bleeding from where his arm used to be. While Giyu was unconscious, the battle continued without him. Other fighters stepped up. Tanjiro kept fighting despite his own injuries. The remaining Hashira who could still move continued attacking. But then something worse than any of them could have imagined happened. Muzan was losing. The sun was rising. Dawn was coming. The Demon Slayers had managed to hold him off long enough that sunlight would kill him in minutes. So Muzan, in a final desperate act, did something unthinkable. He turned Tanjiro into a demon. Muzan injected all his remaining blood into Tanjiro's body, transforming the boy into the most powerful demon that had ever existed, besides Muzan himself. It was Muzan's last attempt to ensure demons would survive. If he died, at least this new Demon King would live on. Tanjiro's transformation was immediate and complete. The boy who'd spent years fighting demons, who dedicated everything to protecting his sister and helping others, became the very thing he hated most. When Giyu regained consciousness, when he woke up and saw what had happened, he was devastated. The story specifically tells us this. He saw Tanjiro as a demon and believed he'd failed again. Failed to protect someone important to him. Failed to stop another tragedy. Failed to be strong enough when it mattered most. Tsutako died protecting him. Sabito died protecting others. Shinobu died fighting Upper Moon too. And now Tanjiro, the boy who'd reminded him so much of Sabito, the one who'd helped him learn to value his own life, had been turned into a demon while Giyu was unconscious and useless. This must have felt like final selection all over again. Knocked out while someone else fought. Waking up to find people dead or changed or lost while Giyu did nothing. The same pattern repeating. Giyu surviving while others suffered. The guilt probably hit him like a physical force. that familiar crushing weight of being alive while people he cared about weren't. But something had changed in Giyu since final selection. Something fundamental had shifted when he awakened his mark, when he accepted that Sabito and Sutako wanted him to live fully rather than die slowly. Because despite losing his arm, despite being injured, despite having every reason to give up or collapse or let someone else handle it, Giyu got back up. He returned to the fight. With only one arm, with his body damaged, with blood loss making everything difficult, he stood up and rejoined the battle. At a crucial moment, when Tanjiro needed help, when the demon-transformed boy was somehow still fighting against Muzan's influence, Giyu did something that proved he'd truly changed. With his remaining hand, his left hand since his right arm was gone, Giyu grabbed Tanjiro's sword. He gripped the blade and held on, and together they turned it red. Just like he'd done with Sanemi earlier, the combination of two people holding the same blade with enough force turned it bright red, making it capable of truly hurting Muzan. This action showed everything about who Giyu had become. Years ago, he would have believed he didn't deserve to help, that he'd just messed things up, that someone else should handle the important moments. But now, despite having every excuse to stay down, missing an arm, severely injured, having just failed to protect Tanjiro, he got up anyway. He helped anyway. He fought anyway. Because that's what Sabito would have done. That's what Sutako would have wanted. That's what making their sacrifices matter looked like. The battle ended with Muzan's death. The sun rose fully, and the sunlight destroyed the Demon King's body completely. After over 1,000 years of terrorizing humanity, after creating countless demons who had killed countless people, after being responsible for almost all the suffering the Demon Slayers had ever faced, Muzan Kibutsuji was finally dead. The demon threat was over. Humanity had won. But victory came at a terrible cost. Most of the Demon Slayer Corps was dead. Lower-ranked Demon Slayers had been slaughtered. Even among the Hashira, several had died during the battles leading up to Muzan. Shinobu was gone. Muichiro was gone. Gyomei would die from his injuries shortly after. The organization that had protected humanity for centuries was nearly destroyed. The survivors were the exception, not the rule. Giyu survived. Despite losing his arm, despite being knocked unconscious, despite everything Muzan threw at him, Giyu lived through the final battle. He was one of only 2 active Hashira who survived without dying, him and Sanemi. Everyone else was either dead or had retired before the final battle. Out of the 9 Hashira who'd started this war against Muzan, only 2 walked away alive and active. During the battle, Giyu's haori had been shredded. That split-pattern haori he'd worn for years, the one with Sutako's red half and Sabito's geometric pattern half, had been torn apart by Muzan's attacks, or the debris from the collapsing castle. The physical memorial he'd carried on his shoulders for so long was destroyed in the final fight. But unlike before, unlike when he first lost Sutako and Sabito, losing the haori didn't mean losing everything. Because Giyu had finally learned that honoring the dead wasn't about carrying their clothing or drowning in guilt. It was about living them, life they'd given him. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. When dawn came and Muzan was dead and the demon threat was eliminated forever, Giyu stood among the survivors, one-armed and exhausted and alive, having finally proven to himself that he was worth the sacrifices made for him. But the real question was whether the boy who'd learned to live could handle what came next. Section 11. Learning to live, not just survive. When the battle ended, when Muzan was finally dead, and the sun rose on a world without demons for the first time in over 1,000 years, Giyu was alive, but changed. Not just emotionally changed, though that had happened too. Physically changed. Permanently altered in ways that would affect the rest of his life. He'd lost his right arm. Not injured, not damaged, completely gone. The limb he'd used to hold his sword for years, the arm he'd trained with since childhood, the one he'd used to create the 11th form and fight countless demons, was no longer attached to his body. Losing an arm isn't something you just recover from. It's not like a cut that heals or a bruise that fades. It's permanent. Your entire body has to relearn how to balance. Simple tasks become complicated. Things you used to do without thinking now require planning and adjustment. For a swordsman, someone whose entire life had been built around fighting with a blade, Losing your sword arm meant losing the ability to fight the way you'd always fought. Giyu would never hold a sword in his right hand again, never use his techniques the same way, never move through combat with the muscle memory he'd built over years of training. He also cut his hair after the battle. Before, Giyu had worn his black hair in a low ponytail at the base of his neck, with choppy bangs and uneven lengths. After everything was over, he cut it down to neck length. This might seem like a small detail, but in Japanese culture, cutting your hair often represents a significant change, a new beginning, letting go of the past. Samurai would cut their hair when retiring or changing their life path. By cutting his hair, Giyu was marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. He was the water Hashira who'd fought Muzan and survived. Now he needed to figure out who he was in a world without demons. The Demon Slayer Corps disbanded. This makes sense. The organization existed to fight demons, and demons were gone. Muzan was dead, and when he died, every demon he'd created died too. All of them, instantly. The only exception was Yushiro, a demon who'd been created by someone other than Muzan. But otherwise, the demon threat was completely eliminated. No more demons meant no more need for demon slayers. The organization that had existed for centuries, that had trained and equipped and coordinated thousands of fighters across Japan, simply ended. There were no more missions, no more training, no more desperate battles in the night. It was over. For Giyu, this meant something profound. He'd spent his entire adult life as a demon slayer. He'd been the water Hashira for years. His identity, his purpose, his daily existence all revolved around fighting demons. And now, that was gone. What do you do when the thing that defined you no longer exists? When the job you dedicated your life to is finished? When the war you've been fighting ends, and you're still alive but don't know what living without fighting means? But Giyu wasn't alone in figuring this out. The other survivors were going through the same adjustment. And something started happening that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Giyu began connecting with people. Actually connecting. Building friendships. Opening up in ways he hadn't for years. The walls he'd maintained so carefully, the distance he'd kept from everyone, the isolation he'd chosen. All of it started breaking down. The story specifically tells us that after defeating Muzan, Giyu ended up developing a closer friendship with Tengen Uzui and Sanemi Shinizugawa. Tengen was the sound Hashira who'd retired after the Entertainment District battle, where he lost an arm and an eye. Sanemi was the wind Hashira, who'd survived the final battle alongside Giyu, one of only 2 active Hashira still alive. These two, who Giyu had barely connected with during his years as a Hashira, became his friends after everything was over. With Sanemi especially, this represented a huge shift. They'd been rivals, almost enemies for years. Sanemi had seen Giyu as arrogant and separate. Giyu had accepted Sanemi's dislike without trying to fix it. They'd clashed over Nezuko, over Giyu's refusal to participate in Hashira training, over fundamental differences in how they saw the world. But during the final battle, they'd fought side by side. They'd coordinated attacks perfectly. They'd turned their swords red together. They'd survived together when most of their fellow Hashira didn't. There's a specific moment the story mentions. At the end of the battle, after Muzan was defeated, Sanemi and Giyu looked at each other and smiled. Just smiled. 2 survivors who'd made it through hell, who'd lost so much, who'd fought together despite their past issues, sharing a moment of relief and understanding. They were the only active Hashira left. Everyone else was dead or had retired before the final battle. Just them. And in that moment, the rivalry and tension didn't matter anymore. They'd survived. They'd won. They could let themselves feel something other than conflict. This friendship that developed between Giyu and Sanemi after the battle showed real character growth. The old Giyu wouldn't have pursued friendship. He would have stayed isolated, accepted that Sanemi disliked him, kept his distance like always. But the new Giyu, the one who'd learned from Tanjiro's question and Sabito's memory that he needed to actually live rather than just survive, made different choices. He let people in. He built connections. He allowed himself to have friends, even though everyone he'd been close to before had died. He took the risk of caring about people, despite knowing that caring meant potential loss. While Giyu was recovering from his wounds, while he was in a coma from the damage his body had taken during the battle against Muzan, something important happened. Nezuko Kamado took his shredded haori and repaired it. The haori that had been torn apart during the battle, that had been worn for years as a memorial to Tsuchako and Sabito, that represented all of Gyu's grief and guilt sewn together, Nezuko carefully put it back together. She'd recently been turned back into a human after spending years as a demon. She'd just regained her ability to speak, to think clearly, to be herself again after so long. And one of the first things she chose to do was repair the haori of the man who'd protected her family, who'd given her and Tanjiro a chance when he could have killed her that day in the mountains. The story tells us she restored most of the haori thanks to her sewing skills. She matched the patterns, kept the split design intact, the solid red half from Tsuchako and the geometric pattern half from Sabito, and made it whole again. When Gyu woke from his coma and saw what Nezuko had done, the story specifically says he was very touched, deeply moved. This quiet, stoic man who rarely showed emotion was genuinely affected by this act of kindness. Here was someone who'd taken time and care to repair something that mattered to him, who'd seen this torn piece of clothing and decided it was worth saving, worth putting back together. Nezuko couldn't have known the full story of what the haori meant. She probably didn't know about Tsuchako, or understand Gyu's connection to Sabito, but she knew it mattered to him, and that was enough. Gyu's response was to send Nezuko many gifts, not just one or two items, but many. The story lists some of them: hairpins, Western-style kimonos, different accessories. He basically showered her with presents as his way of expressing gratitude. This is significant because Gyu wasn't good with words. He didn't explain his feelings or say thank you directly, but he could show appreciation through actions, through gifts, through making sure Nezuko knew he was grateful, even if he couldn't say it properly. Zenitsu Agatsuma, who had romantic feelings for Nezuko, became jealous about all the attention Gyu was giving her. This is almost funny, Zenitsu getting jealous of the water Hashira sending gifts to the girl he liked. But it shows how much Gyu's behavior had changed. The old Gyu wouldn't have sent gifts to anyone. He wouldn't have expressed gratitude. He wouldn't have done anything that might create connections or show vulnerability. But the new Gyu did all of that. He let himself feel thankful. He let himself show it. He let himself have a relationship with these siblings who changed his life, even if that relationship made Zenitsu jealous. The haori itself became symbolic of something beyond just Tsuchako and Sabito's memory. Yes, it still represented them, still carried their patterns, still reminded Gyu of their sacrifices. But now it also represented healing. It had been destroyed in battle and was put back together. It had been torn apart and was sewn up again. Just like Gyu himself, broken by trauma, shredded by guilt, torn apart by loss, but slowly being put back together by people who cared about him. The repaired haori was proof that broken things could be fixed, that damage didn't have to be permanent, that even the most painful memories could be carried forward without destroying the person carrying them. Years passed. The story doesn't tell us every detail of what Gyu did in those years, but we know some things. He lived in a world without demons, which meant living without the constant threat of death, without missions, without the purpose that had defined him for so long. He had to figure out who Gyu Tomioka was when he wasn't the water Hashira. He had to learn to exist in peace after spending years preparing for war. He had to adjust to life with one arm, to limitations he'd never had before, to a body that worked differently than it used to. But he also had friendships now. He had Sanemi and Tengen. He had connections to Tanjiro and his friends. He had a support system he'd never allowed himself before. He wasn't isolated anymore, wasn't alone, wasn't carrying everything by himself. The man who'd spent years keeping everyone at a distance had finally let people close enough to matter. The epilogue of Demon Slayer shows us the modern era, present-day Japan, decades or maybe even a century after the final battle. We see descendants of the main characters living normal lives in a world that's completely forgotten demons ever existed. And among these descendants, we see a boy named Gyu Tomioka. He's a grade school student who attends swimming school. The name is the same, Gyu Tomioka, which strongly suggests he's a direct descendant of the water Hashira. This matters because it means Gyu lived long enough to have a family, to have children, or at least ensure his bloodline continued, to create life, instead of just surviving. The boy who'd believed he didn't deserve to live, who'd thought his existence was a mistake, who'd spent years wishing he'd died instead of Sabito. That boy grew into a man who built a feud, who created a family line that continued into the modern era, who did something with the life Sutako and Sabito gave him. The very last images the story shows us of Giyu are some of the most important. The final panels depict him walking down a road lined with fully bloomed cherry blossoms. Cherry blossoms in Japan represent the beauty and brevity of life. They bloom gorgeously and then fall away quickly, reminding people that life is precious because it doesn't last forever. And Giyu is walking through these cherry blossoms with a gentle smile on his face and warm light in his eyes. The story's caption for these final images says, "Finally forgiven himself and learned to live, not just survive." This is the conclusion of Giyu's entire character arc. He started as a boy who survived his sister's death. He became a man who survived his best friend's death. He spent years surviving while hating himself for it, existing, but not truly living, carrying guilt that crushed everything good in his life. But he ended as someone who'd forgiven himself, who'd accepted that Sutako and Sabito wanted him to live, who'd learned that survival wasn't something to feel guilty about, it was a gift to be used. Living versus surviving, that's the difference. Surviving means going through the motions, existing day to day without purpose or joy or connection. Living means choosing to engage with the world, to build relationships, to find meaning, to create something worth having. Giyu spent years surviving. He ended his story living. And that transformation, from the boy who forgot how to feel to the man who remembered, made all the difference. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But there was one final truth about Giyu's story that made everything more bittersweet. A curse attached to the very mark that had helped him survive, a price for the power that saved his life and the lives of others. A deadline that had been counting down from the moment the mark appeared on his face. Section 12, the curse of living. During the Hashira meeting, after several demon slayers awakened their demon slayer marks, after Muichiro Tokito and Mitsuri Kanroji showed their marks and displayed the incredible power that came with them, Amane, Ubuyashiki revealed something that changed everything. She was the wife of Kagaya Ubuyashiki, the leader of the Demon Slayer Corps, and she'd researched the history of the marks extensively. What she found wasn't just information about how to awaken them or what powers they provided. She found the cost. The Demon Slayer mark came with a curse. Everyone who awakened the mark would die before reaching the age of 25. Not might die, not could die, would die. It was absolute, guaranteed. Awaken the mark, and you're signing your own death sentence. You get the power, the speed, the enhanced abilities that let you fight upper moon demons and survive battles that would kill normal demon slayers. But you pay for it with years of your life. You don't get to grow old. You don't get to see 30 or 40 or 50. You get until 25 at most, and then you die. If someone awakened their mark after already turning 25, it was even worse. They'd die within hours. Not days, not weeks, hours. The mark would appear, give them that brief surge of incredible power, and then kill them almost immediately. The only known exception to this rule was Yoriichi Tsugikuni, the first person to ever have a Demon Slayer mark. And he only survived past 25 because he was born with the mark. He didn't awaken it through battle or training or pushing past his limits. It was just there from birth. And he lived into his 80s, proving that being born with the mark was fundamentally different from awakening it. But for everyone else, everyone who awakened their mark through combat, through desperation, through pushing themselves beyond human limits to survive impossible battles, the curse applied. They had until age 25. That was the price for the power that let them save humanity. Giyu awakened his mark during the battle with Akaza. He was 19 years old at the time. The story tells us this. He was 19 before the time skip that happened after the final battle, and he was 21 after. So when the mark appeared on his left cheek, when that water-like design emerged and gave him the speed and power to fight an upper moon demon on equal footing, Giyu was 19, which meant, according to the curse, he had until age 25 before he died. That's 6 years total. But the final battle happened when Giyu was 19, going on 20. After Muzan was defeated, after the Demon Slayer Corps disbanded, after everything ended and the world entered an era of peace, Giyu was around 20 years old. If the curse held true, and there was no reason to believe it wouldn't, Giyu had approximately 3 to 5 years left to live. 3 to 5 years in a world without demons. 3 to 5 years to figure out who he was when he wasn't fighting. 3 to 5 years to actually live after spending so long just surviving. Think about the tragedy of that time. Giyu spent his entire youth drowning in guilt, believing he didn't deserve to exist, maintaining dead calm in his heart because feeling anything meant remembering everything he'd lost. He was the water Hashira for years, technically alive but emotionally dead, going through the motions without really living. Then, finally, at age 19, he started to heal. Tanjiro asked him the right question. He remembered Sabito's words about his life having value. He awakened his mark and proved he was worth the sacrifices made for him. He survived the final battle and began learning to actually live, to build friendships, to connect with people, to forgive himself, to be something other than a walking memorial to dead loved ones. And just as he figured all this out, just as he finally learned how to feel again, just as he started actually living instead of just surviving, the clock started counting down. 3 years, maybe 5, and then death. Guaranteed. Unavoidable. The mark that helped him survive, that proved his worth, that gave him the power to protect others and make Sabito and Tsutako's sacrifices meaningful. That same mark sentenced him to death before he could fully enjoy the life he'd fought so hard to. Except, the irony is cruel. Giyu spent years wishing he'd died instead of Sabito, believing his survival was wrong, thinking he didn't deserve the life Tsutako and Sabito gave him. He wanted to die. He actively struggled with the belief that his existence was a mistake. And then, when he finally learned to value his life, when he finally accepted that living was good and worth doing, and something to embrace rather than endure, he found out he only had a few years left. The universe gave him the desire to live right as it took away the time to do it. But here's the thing about those final years. Giyu lived them fully. The evidence suggests he made every moment count. The modern era epilogue shows a descendant named Giyu Tomioka, which means the original Giyu had a family. He didn't spend his remaining years isolated and alone. He didn't waste them drowning in new guilt about the mark's curse. He didn't return to dead calm emotionally just because death was coming. Instead, he built a life. He created connections. He had relationships. He ensured his bloodline continued, meaning he had children or at least played a role in his family's future. This is what makes Giyu's ending beautiful despite being tragic. Most people get decades to live. They have time to waste, time to spend on things that don't matter, time to put off important decisions or meaningful connections because there's always tomorrow. Giyu didn't have that luxury. He knew his time was limited. He knew death was coming before his 25th birthday. He had no time to waste, no room for hesitation, no chance to put things off until later. Every day after the final battle was borrowed time. Every moment was precious because there weren't many moments left. And knowing this, understanding that his days were numbered, Giyu chose to live anyway. He chose to build friendships with Sanemi and Tengen, despite knowing he'd die young and leave them behind. He chose to connect with Tanjiro and his friends, despite knowing those connections would end too soon. He chose to have a family, despite knowing he wouldn't be there to watch his children grow up. He chose life, fully and completely, even though life was going to be short. This choice transforms everything that came before. All those years Giyu spent believing he didn't deserve to live, all that time wishing he'd died instead of Sabito, all that guilt and self-hatred and emotional debt, it becomes even more tragic because he wasted years of a life that was always going to be short. He spent his youth dying inside when he only had until age 25 anyway. He threw away time he couldn't afford to waste. But it also makes his healing more meaningful. When Giyu learned to value his life, when he forgave himself, when he started living instead of surviving, he did it knowing time was limited. That takes a different kind of courage. It's one thing to choose life when you think you have decades ahead of you. It's another thing entirely to choose life when you know you only have 3 years. To build relationships, knowing you'll lose them soon. To create a family, knowing you won't be there for most of their lives. To open your heart, knowing it will be broken by your own death. The final images of Giyu tell us everything we need to know. He's walking under cherry blossoms in full bloom. Cherry blossoms are famous for being beautiful and brief. They flower gorgeously and then fall away quickly, lasting only a short time before they're gone. They're used throughout Japanese culture to represent life itself, beautiful, precious, and temporary. Everything that blooms eventually falls. Everything that lives eventually dies. The beauty is in the blooming, not in lasting forever. Giyu walking through cherry blossoms is the story telling us he understood this. Life doesn't have to be long to matter. Sabito only lived to 17, but his life mattered enormously. Sutako only lived to her early 20s, but her life had meaning. Giyu only lived to around 23 or 24, probably, based on the Mark's curse. But those final few years, after he learned to live, after he opened his heart, after he forgave himself, those years were worth more than all the time he'd spent in dead calm. The story's caption for those final images says Giyu finally forgave himself and learned to live, not just survive. This is the endpoint of his entire character arc. He forgave himself for Sutako's death. He accepted that an 8-year-old couldn't have saved his sister from a demon. He forgave himself for Sabito's death. He accepted that being unconscious during final selection didn't make him a fraud. He forgave himself for surviving when others didn't. He accepted that Sutako and Sabito wanted him to live, that their sacrifices were choices they made because they believed his life had value. And once he forgave himself, once he released the guilt that had crushed him for years, he could finally live. Not survive, not exist, not go through the motions. Live. Feel things. Connect with people. Build a future, even if that future would be short. Make choices based on what he wanted, rather than what he thought he deserved. Be the person Sabito had seen in him all along. Someone worth saving. Someone worth dying for. Someone whose life mattered. The gentle smile on Giyu's face in those final panels is maybe the most important detail. Throughout the entire story, Giyu was known for his stoic expression, his blank face, his inability to show emotion. The story specifically mentions that seeing a fresh plate of salmon daikon once made Giyu smile. And it was remarkable because he smiled so rarely. His face was like dead calm, perfectly still, revealing nothing, giving no indication of what he felt inside. But in the end, he's smiling, gently but genuinely. The mask is gone. The dead calm is broken. The emotional numbness has thawed. Giyu can feel again, and what he feels, walking through cherry blossoms, living in a peaceful world, knowing he made the most of his limited time, is contentment, maybe even happiness. The warm light in his eyes suggests peace, the kind you can only achieve when you've truly forgiven yourself and accepted your life as worthwhile. Only 3 demon slayers who awakened marks during the final battles survived: Tanjiro Kamado, Giyu Tomioka, and Sanemi Shinazugawa. All 3 were cursed. All 3 would die before 25. The story tells us their ultimate fates are unknown, but the implication is clear. They're all on borrowed time. They beat Muzan. They saved humanity. They earned a world without demons, but they won't get to live in that world for long. This makes their victory bittersweet. They won the war, but will lose their lives young. They saved everyone, but couldn't save themselves from the Mark's curse. They get to see peace, but not enjoy it for more than a few years. The younger generation they protected, Tanjiro's friends who didn't have marks, the demon slayers who survived without awakening that power, those people will get to live full lives in the peaceful world. They'll grow old, have families, see their grandchildren. But the ones who fought the hardest, who sacrificed the most, who pushed past human limits to save everyone, they get 3 years, maybe 5. And then they're gone. But maybe that's okay. Maybe that's even appropriate. Because Giyu's story was never about living a long life. It was about learning that life's value isn't measured in years, but in meaning. Sabito lived 17 years and changed everything for Giyu. Sutako lived maybe 20 years and gave Giyu the chance to survive. Giyu lived to probably 23 or 24, and in those final few years after awakening his mark, after learning to feel again, he created a legacy that continued into the modern era. The Hashira who forgot how to feel didn't forget. He deliberately killed his emotions to survive unbearable grief. He created dead calm in his heart, because feeling anything meant remembering everyone he'd lost, and remembering hurt too much to bear. He wore the deaths of 2 people on his shoulders because he believed his survival was a mistake, that he was only alive because better people died in his place. But in the end, Giyu remembered. He let himself feel. He broke the dead calm and opened his heart despite knowing it would hurt, despite knowing he'd lose everything again, despite knowing his time was limited. He chose 3 years of actually living over a lifetime of emotional death. He chose cherry blossoms over eternal winter. He chose to honor Sabito and Sutako by making their sacrifices meaningful, rather than by drowning in guilt over receiving them. And in those final years, walking through blooming cherry blossoms with a gentle smile and warm light in his eyes, Giyu Tomioka finally understood what Sabito had tried to tell him years ago when he slapped him across the face. Your life is a gift. Use it. Don't waste it wishing you died instead. Live it, fully, completely, for as long as you have it. The water Hashira learned to feel again, and that made all the difference. So, was Giyu Tomioka really the Hashira who forgot how to feel? Not exactly. He didn't forget. He chose not to. He deliberately shut down his emotions because feeling meant remembering, and remembering meant reliving the night Sutako died protecting him. The morning he woke up at final selection to find Sabito gone, the crushing weight of being alive while everyone who loved him was dead. Dead calm wasn't just a sword technique. It was a survival strategy. It was how Giyu protected himself from grief so overwhelming it could have destroyed him completely. We've seen how every piece of Giyu's character was built on trauma, layered upon trauma. His sister's sacrifice taught him that being loved meant watching people die for you. Sabito's death at final selection proved that pattern would repeat, that he'd always be the one who survived while better people fell. The haori he wore every day was a walking memorial. 2 halves of dead people sewn together, a constant reminder that he existed only because they didn't. And his creation of the 11th form showed how deeply he'd internalized this pain. He turned emotional numbness into his greatest strength, made his inability to feel into the technique that defined him as the water Hashira. For years, this worked. Giyu functioned. He killed demons. He fulfilled his duties. He became one of the strongest demon slayers in Japan. But functioning isn't living, and strength built on self-hatred is a prison, not freedom. The other Hashira saw his isolation as arrogance when it was actually shame. They interpreted his silence as superiority when it was really the belief that he didn't deserve to stand with them. Giyu spent years as the water Hashira while believing he'd stolen the title from Sabito's corpse, that every demon he killed was one Sabito should have killed instead, that his entire existence was a fraud built on luck and other people's sacrifices. Then Tanjiro Kamado asked one simple question. Do you want to continue your life for Sabito? 6 words that cut through years of walls. Because Giyu had been so focused on what Sabito lost, his life, his future, his chance to be the water Hashira, that he'd forgotten what Sabito chose. Sabito chose to save people. He chose to protect Giyu. He chose other lives over his own safety because he believed those lives were worth saving. And wasting the life Sabito died to protect was the real betrayal, not accepting it. When Giyu awakened his Demon Slayer mark against Akaza, when he finally believed he was worth the sacrifices made for him, when he chose to live for Sutako and Sabito instead of dying slowly because of them, that was the turning point. The mark appeared because Giyu finally valued his own existence. The power came because he'd accepted the gift his loved ones gave him. He fought an Upper Moon demon on equal footing, not because he was always capable of it, but because he finally believed he deserved to be capable of it. And then came the curse. 3 years, maybe 5, before the mark would kill him. He learned to live just as death became guaranteed. But those final years weren't wasted. Giyu built friendships. He connected with people. He had a family. He chose cherry blossoms, beautiful and brief, over eternal winter. He chose 3 years of actually living over decades of emotional death. The Hashira, who forgot how to feel, remembered. He broke the dead calm in his heart. He let himself connect with Tanjiro, with Sanemi, with Nezuko, who repaired his haori, just like people repaired his broken heart. He walked through blooming cherry blossoms with a gentle smile and warm light in his eyes, finally forgiving himself, finally understanding that Sabito and Satako didn't die so he could drown in guilt. They died so he could live. Giyu Tomioka's story isn't about forgetting how to feel. It's about choosing to feel again despite knowing it will hurt. It's about learning that survival isn't something to apologize for. It's a responsibility to honor. It's about understanding that life's value isn't measured in years, but in meaning. And 3 years of truly living beats a lifetime of just surviving. The water Hashira didn't forget. He remembered. And that made all the difference. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.